My parents sat at the Thanksgiving table, eating the feast I had purchased and cooked, and called me a parasite. They demanded I drain my emergency savings to fund my golden child sister's luxury destination wedding. When I refused, they threw me out into the November cold, telling me I would never survive without their charity. They thought kicking me to the curb would break me. They had absolutely no idea that 9 months later, their entire financial facade would shatter. They did not know that their mortgage was already rotting from the inside out, or that I would be the anonymous corporate buyer who purchased their foreclosed home at a public courthouse auction. They thought they were the masters of my universe. They were about to learn exactly who controlled their future. I adjusted my grip on the roasting pan, the ceramic burning through my thin oven mitts. My arms ached from 12 hours of prep work. I had been awake since 5 in the morning, chopping vegetables, basting the 20-pound bird, and making sure my mother's heirloom silver was polished to her exact specifications. I carried the heavy platter out of the sweltering kitchen and into the formal dining room. The air in the dining room was cool, filled with the scent of expensive pine candles and the loud, booming laughter of Bradley Weston. Bradley was my younger sister's new fiancé. He was the son of a prominent corporate real estate developer, and he wore a tailored suit to a family Thanksgiving dinner just to make sure we all knew how much money he had. Sitting next to him was my sister Chloe. She was 26 years old, perfectly manicured, and currently holding up her left hand so the dining room chandelier could catch the light on her 3-carat diamond engagement ring. My father Richard sat at the head of the table. He was swirling a glass of Cabernet, nodding along to whatever story Bradley was telling about his family's winter home in Aspen. My mother, Patricia, sat at the opposite end, gazing at Chloe and Bradley with an expression of pure, unadulterated worship. Nobody looked up when I entered. Nobody offered to help me lower the massive turkey onto the center trivet. I set the heavy platter down, the ceramic clinking sharply against the polished mahogany table. "That looks acceptable, Sarah," my mother said. She did not say thank you. She just inspected the golden brown skin of the turkey, like a health inspector looking for a violation. "Pour the wine, please. Bradley's glass is getting low." I am 31 years old. I am a certified public accountant. I work 50-hour weeks managing ledgers for medium-sized businesses, unraveling complex tax codes, and balancing corporate budgets. But in this house in my parents' home, I was nothing more than the unpaid help. I picked up the bottle of Cabernet and walked around the table. The wine had cost me $80. The groceries for this entire meal had cost me nearly $400. I had paid for all of it because my father told me earlier this month that things were just a little tight with his contracting business, and they needed me to step up for the holidays. I poured the wine into Bradley's glass. He did not look at me. He just continued talking to my father. "So Richard," Bradley said, leaning back in his chair, "Chloe and I have finalized the venue for the wedding. We decided against the local country club. It just felt a little too common for our tastes. We want an experience, something our guests will remember forever." My mother clasped her hands together, her eyes shining with tears of absolute joy. "Oh, tell us, Bradley, where are you taking our beautiful girl?" Chloe practically bounced in her seat. "We booked a private vineyard estate in Napa Valley, Mom. It is completely exclusive. We are renting out the entire property for a 3-day weekend. There will be wine tastings, a welcome gala, and the ceremony is going to take place under these gorgeous weeping willow trees." My father beamed, raising his glass. "To Napa Valley. Only the best for my daughter." I took my seat near the kitchen door, the worst chair at the table. I picked up my fork, but my appetite was already gone. My mind, trained by years of accounting, instantly started running the numbers. A private vineyard buyout in Napa Valley for a wedding weekend. Travel accommodations. Catering for Bradley's high society family. I knew exactly what that kind of event cost. "That sounds incredible, Chloe," my father said, his voice swelling with pride. "What is the damage on a venue like that?" "Do not worry. We are ready to do our part." Chloe smiled, looking entirely unbothered. "Well, the venue and the weekend package total out to about $60,000. Bradley's parents are covering the catering and the floral arrangements, which is super generous of them. So we just need you guys to cover the venue deposit and the remaining balance. $60,000. The number hung over the roasted turkey and the cranberry sauce. I looked at my father. I expected him to choke on his expensive wine. I expected reality to crash down on this ridiculous fantasy. My father's contracting business had been bleeding money for 3 years. I knew this because I was the one who had bailed them out. Instead, my father did not even blink. He just puffed out his chest, desperate to look like a wealthy patriarch in front of his future son-in-law. 60,000, my father repeated, forcing a hearty chuckle. Well, weddings only happen once. We will absolutely make that work. Consider the venue covered. My mother let out a dramatic sigh of relief. We would not dream of giving you anything less than a perfect day, Chloe. I sat frozen. I stared at my parents, wondering if they had completely lost their minds. They did not have $60,000. They did not even have $6,000. Just last month, my mother had cried in the kitchen because the property taxes were due, and she did not know how they were going to pay them without dipping into their retirement. Then my father slowly turned his head. His eyes locked onto mine from across the table. The jovial, wealthy patriarch mask vanished. In its place was the cold, demanding expression I knew all too well. Actually, Sarah, my father said, his voice dropping into a serious, businesslike tone. This brings up something we need to discuss with you. I put my fork down. The silence in the dining room suddenly felt very heavy. What is it? I asked. Your mother and I are moving some investments around to free up the cash for Chloe's wedding. My father lied flawlessly without breaking eye contact. But those liquidations take time. Chloe needs to secure the vineyard by next Friday or they lose the date. We need you to write a check for $15,000 to cover the initial deposit. Consider it a loan to the family. Bradley took a slow sip of his wine, watching me with mild amusement. Chloe looked at me expectantly, as if my father had just asked me to pass the salt, instead of demanding a massive sum of money. I felt a cold sweat break out on the back of my neck. $15,000. That was exactly the amount I had sitting in my high-yield savings account. It was my emergency fund. It was the money I had painstakingly saved to eventually move out of my parents' basement and buy my own place. I looked at my mother. She was staring at me, her eyes daring me to embarrass her in front of Bradley. No, I said quietly. The single word hit the dining table like a physical blow. Bradley lowered his wine glass. Chloe's jaw dropped. Excuse me, my father asked, his face flushing red. I took a deep breath, fighting the tremor in my chest. I said no. I am not giving you $15,000 for a wedding venue. Sarah. My mother snapped, her voice sharp and warning. This is not the time to be selfish. Your sister needs to secure her date. Your father just told you we will pay you back as soon as the investment funds clear. There are no investment funds, Mom, I said, my voice growing stronger. I am an accountant. I know what things cost, and I know exactly what you do and do not have. You do not have $60,000 sitting in a portfolio waiting to clear. Bradley shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Perhaps this is a private family matter, he murmured, though he made no move to leave the table. No Bradley should hear this, my father snarled, pointing a finger at me. You listen to me, young lady. You are going to write that check by Monday morning. You live in this house. You eat our food. You will contribute to your sister's future. The sheer audacity of his statement ignited a fire in my stomach. Years of biting my tongue, years of making myself small, years of opening my wallet to buy their conditional love finally boiled over. Contribute, I asked, pushing my chair back from the table. I have done nothing but contribute. You want to talk about loans? Let us talk about loans. Sarah, stop right now. My mother hissed, her face turning pale. I did not stop. 2 years ago, when the roof needed to be replaced and you could not get financing, I gave you $12,000. You said you would pay me back when business picked up. You never did. Last year, when Dad's work truck broke down and he could not get to his job sites, I paid $8,000 for the transmission rebuild. You said you would pay me back. You never did. Over the last 5 years, I've transferred exactly $40,000 into your joint checking account for tight months' medical bills and property taxes. I have never seen a single cent returned. Chloe scoffed, crossing her arms. Are you seriously keeping a running tally of helping your own parents? That is so petty, Sarah. It is called basic accounting. Chloe, I fired back, and I am not draining my life savings so you can drink champagne under a weeping willow tree in California. If you want a luxury wedding, ask your wealthy fiancé to pay for it or scale it down to something you can actually afford. Bradley's face went rigid. His eyes darted to my father. Richard. What is she talking about? Is there a financial issue here? My father was practically vibrating with rage. He slammed his fist onto the table, making the crystal wine glasses rattle. There is no financial issue, Bradley. My eldest daughter is just a bitter, jealous woman who cannot stand to see her sister happy. Patricia stood up from her chair. She grabbed her wine glass, her knuckles white, and slammed it down onto the table with such force that red wine sloshed over the rim and stained the expensive white tablecloth. "You ungrateful parasite!" my mother screamed, her voice echoing off the dining room walls. "How dare you sit at my table and disrespect this family? How dare you try to humiliate us in front of Bradley?" I stood up to face her. "I am not a parasite. I bought this food. I cooked this meal." "You live in our basement," she shrieked, pointing wildly toward the hallway door. "You are 31 years old, and you hide in our basement rent-free because you are too pathetic to make a real life for yourself. You owe us everything." "Rent-free?" I asked, staring at her in absolute disbelief. "Are you actually going to lie to everyone right now? I pay you $1,500 every single month in what you call maintenance fees. I pay market rate rent to live in a damp basement room so you can afford to keep the lights on in this massive house. I am paying your utility bills right now." "That is a lie," Chloe yelled, standing up next to my mother. "Mom and Dad do not need your money. You are just a loser who cannot afford to leave." I looked around the table at my family. I looked at the turkey I had spent all day cooking. I looked at the expensive wine I had purchased to celebrate a holiday centered on gratitude. They were never going to see the truth. They were never going to see me as a daughter. They only saw me as a bank account, an endless well of funds they felt entirely entitled to drain. "I will not write the check," I said, my voice deathly calm. "And I am not giving you another dime of my money ever again." My father walked around the edge of the large dining table. He stopped inches from my face. His breath smelled heavily of the wine I had bought. His eyes were cold and dead. "If you will not support this family, you do not sleep under our roof," he said, his voice low and dangerous. I stared back at him. "What are you saying?" "I am saying you are done here," my father snarled. "Pack your bags. Get your things out of my basement. I want you out of this house by midnight." "Dad, it is Thanksgiving," I whispered, a sudden wave of shock hitting my chest. "It is freezing outside. Where am I supposed to go?" "I do not care where you go," my father replied, turning his back on me and walking back to his seat at the head of the table. "You are resourceful. You are an accountant. Figure it out. But you are no longer welcome in this home." My mother sat back down and picked up her wine glass. She looked at me with an expression of complete disgust. "You heard your father. Midnight. Now get out of my dining room. We are trying to celebrate Chloe's engagement." I stood there for 3 long seconds. I waited for Chloe to say something. I waited for Bradley to intervene. I waited for my parents to realize they were throwing their own daughter out into the winter cold over a wedding venue deposit. Nobody said a word. Chloe just reached for her wine glass, and Bradley picked up his fork to finally taste the turkey. I turned around and walked out of the dining room. I did not cry. I did not beg. I walked down the narrow wooden stairs into the basement, my mind shifting gears from a rejected daughter into a forensic accountant. They wanted me out by midnight. They were about to get exactly what they asked for, but I was not going to leave empty-handed. I was going to find out exactly why they were suddenly so desperate for cash, and I was going to make sure they never took advantage of me again. My parents sat at the Thanksgiving table, eating the feast I had purchased and cooked, and called me a parasite. They demanded I drain my emergency savings to fund my golden child sister's luxury destination wedding. When I refused, they threw me out into the November cold, telling me I would never survive without their charity. They thought kicking me to the curb would break me. They had absolutely no idea that 9 months later, their entire financial facade would shatter. They did not know that their mortgage was already rotting from the inside out, or that I would be the anonymous corporate buyer who purchased their foreclosed home at a public courthouse auction. They thought they were the masters of my universe. They were about to learn exactly who controlled their future. The basement stairs creaked under my feet as I descended into the damp chill of my bedroom. The sounds of clinking glasses and booming laughter drifted down from the dining room right above my head. They were already moving on. They were drinking the wine I bought and celebrating a wedding I was supposed to fund, completely unbothered by the fact that they had just made me homeless on Thanksgiving night. I pulled my 2 battered suitcases from the back of my closet and dropped them onto the thin carpet. I had until midnight, but I wanted to be gone in an hour. I opened my dresser drawers and started pulling out my clothes. Sweaters, slacks, practical blouses I wore to the accounting firm. I folded them mechanically, my mind operating on autopilot to keep the panic at bay. I looked around the room. I had lived in this basement for 3 years. I had paid my parents $1,500 a month for the privilege of sleeping in a room that smelled faintly of mildew and old laundry. I had paid them $54,000 in rent over the past 36 months, not counting the countless emergency loans and household repairs. And yet, looking at my meager belongings, I realized I had absolutely nothing to show for it. I was packing my life into 2 suitcases, while the people who had drained my bank accounts were upstairs plotting a $60,000 party. My hands shook as I zipped the first suitcase closed. The reality of the November cold outside began to sink in. The temperature was already dropping below freezing. I did not have a destination. I did not have an apartment lined up. I just had my car and whatever I could carry. But as I reached for my winter coat, a sudden sharp thought cut through the fog of my anxiety. My vital documents, my birth certificate, my passport, and my original Social Security card were not in my basement room. They were upstairs. My father kept all the important family documents in a small, heavy, fireproof lockbox hidden inside his home office. I knew the lockbox was rarely actually locked because my father was a man of immense arrogance who believed his home was an impenetrable fortress. If I left tonight without those documents, I knew I would never get them back. My mother would hold them hostage. She would use them as leverage to force me into paying for the wedding venue. I needed to get into that office right now. I crept back up the basement stairs, making sure to step on the outer edges of the wooden treads to avoid making a sound. I cracked the door open and peered down the hallway. The dining room was at the front of the house. I could hear Bradley telling another long, arrogant story about a golf trip. My sister Chloe was giggling loudly. My parents were completely captivated. The home office was at the very back of the house, down a short corridor past the kitchen. I slipped out of the basement stairwell and moved silently across the hardwood floor. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. If my father caught me sneaking into his office, he would explode. He would accuse me of trying to steal from him. The irony of that thought almost made me laugh out loud. I reached the heavy oak door of the office and turned the brass knob. It clicked softly and swung open. The room was dark, illuminated only by the pale moonlight filtering through the window blinds. I slipped inside and closed the door behind me, plunging the room into shadows. I turned on the small desk lamp, keeping the light angled downward. The office smelled like my father, cheap cologne, and stale coffee. I moved around to the heavy mahogany desk and pulled open the bottom right drawer. The fireproof lockbox was sitting exactly where it always did. I held my breath, reached down, and lifted the heavy lid. It was not locked. I let out a slow, silent exhale of relief. I quickly sifted through the thick manila folders inside. Vehicle titles, outdated insurance policies, old tax returns that I had prepared for his failing contracting business. Finally, I found the folder marked with my name. I pulled out my birth certificate, my passport, and my Social Security card. I folded them carefully and slid them deep into the inner pocket of my winter coat. I was about to close the lockbox and leave the room when my elbow accidentally bumped the heavy leather desk blotter. The thick pad slid sideways across the polished wood, revealing a flat, disorganized stack of mail that had been deliberately hidden underneath it. I froze. The envelopes were stark white with bold red lettering printed across the front. As an accountant, I recognized that specific shade of red immediately. It was the color banks used when polite reminders had failed. It was the color of final warnings. I set the lockbox lid down softly and reached for the stack of mail. I pulled the top envelope toward the lamplight. The logo belonged to the major national bank that held the mortgage on my parents' house. The envelope had already been torn open. I pulled out the letter inside. The words printed across the top of the page made the breath catch in my throat. Notice of intent to foreclose. My eyes darted down to the financial breakdown on the page. The account was severely delinquent. My parents had not made a single mortgage payment in 6 full months. The total past due amount, including late fees and penalties, was staggering. The bank was giving them exactly 30 days to cure the default, or they would initiate formal foreclosure proceedings. I stared at the date on the letter. It had been mailed 3 weeks ago. Their deadline was looming. I felt a cold wave of shock wash over me. My parents were broke. They were not just struggling, they were actively losing the house. Yet less than an hour ago, my father had puffed out his chest and confidently promised to pay $60,000 for a luxury vineyard wedding in Napa Valley. It made absolutely no sense. How could they possibly think they could pay for a wedding when the bank was about to take the roof over their heads? I shuffled the mortgage notice to the bottom of the stack, my hands moving with urgent precision. The next document was a thick credit card statement from a premium wealth management bank. I frowned. My parents did not bank with this institution. Their credit scores were terrible from years of missed payments on my father's business loans. I knew this for a fact. I pulled the statement under the light. I looked at the name printed in the top left corner. The name on the statement was Sarah Elizabeth. My name. I stared at the letters, my mind struggling to process the impossible information right in front of my eyes. This was not a joint account. This was a primary account holder statement. But I had never opened an account with this premium bank. I never applied for this credit card. I looked at the credit limit, $50,000. I looked at the current balance, $48,750. A sudden ringing noise filled my ears. I felt physically sick, as if the floor had dropped out from beneath my feet. I scanned down to the itemized transaction list, my eyes desperately reading the printed lines. The charges were recent. All of them had been made within the last 4 weeks. The first major charge was to an exclusive luxury jeweler downtown, $22,000. The transaction date perfectly matched the weekend Bradley proposed to Chloe. My parents had not just helped pick out the ring, they had financed it. They had secretly stolen my identity, opened a massive line of credit, using my pristine financial history, and bought Chloe's massive 3-carat diamond engagement ring with my stolen money. I read the next major charge, a high-end Swiss watch boutique, $12,000, Bradley's Rolex. The extravagant welcome to the family gift my father had proudly presented to him at dinner 2 weeks ago, boasting about how the family business was thriving. The rest of the charges were a sickening list of luxury expenses. High-end bridal boutiques, deposit payments for a luxury wedding planner, expensive catering tasting fees, and thousands of dollars at designer clothing stores. My parents had maxed out a fraudulent credit card in my name to buy their way into Bradley's wealthy society, all while screaming at me for being a parasite. If I had been anyone else, I might have collapsed onto the floor. I might have burst into tears, marched into the dining room, and screamed until my lungs gave out. I might have demanded answers. I might have let the profound betrayal break my heart into a million pieces. But I did not cry. I am a forensic accountant. I spend my days tracking down financial fraud, identifying missing assets, and building ironclad cases against corporate embezzlers. In that dark, silent home office, my grief instantly hardened into cold, calculating focus. My parents had just crossed a line that could not be uncrossed. They had committed felony identity theft. I pulled my cell phone out of my pocket. I turned the camera flash off. I flattened the mortgage foreclosure notice under the desk lamp and snapped a crystal clear photograph of the entire document. I flipped to the second page and photographed that too. I moved with rapid mechanical efficiency. I took the fraudulent credit card statement and photographed every single page, making sure the account numbers, my stolen name, and the itemized luxury transactions were perfectly legible. I took pictures of 5 other past due utility bills and maxed out department store credit cards hidden in the stack. I gathered all the physical evidence of their financial ruin and their criminal activity. I neatly tapped the edges of the papers against the desk, aligning them perfectly. I slid the stack back into its exact original position and gently pulled the heavy leather blotter over the top. I turned off the small desk lamp, plunging the room back into shadows. I slipped out of the office and quietly closed the oak door, making sure it clicked shut. The laughter from this dining room was still going strong as I tiptoed past the hallway. I could hear my mother loudly bragging to Bradley about how she planned to completely redecorate the house next spring. I walked silently down the basement stairs. I grabbed my 2 suitcases and my winter coat. I did not take a final look around the room. I carried my bags up the side stairwell that led directly to the garage. The cold November wind hit my face the moment I opened the exterior door, biting through my thin sweater, but I barely felt it. The adrenaline coursing through my veins kept me completely warm. I threw my bags into the trunk of my car and slammed it shut. I climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. I did not turn the headlights on until I was halfway down the street. I looked in my rearview mirror at the large, beautiful house illuminated by the warm golden glow of the dining room windows. Inside, my family was drinking wine and laughing, entirely convinced they had won. They thought they had successfully disposed of the ungrateful daughter. They had no idea they had just handed a forensic accountant the exact weapon needed to completely destroy them. I drove for 20 minutes until I found a cheap motel near the highway interstate. I pulled into the desolate, poorly lit parking lot and turned off the engine. I did not go inside to book a room right away. I sat alone in the dark, cold car, the streetlights casting long shadows across my dashboard. I opened the secure folder on my phone and verified that the photographs of the documents were saved and backed up to my private cloud server. Then, I opened my banking applications. My fingers flew across the digital keyboard with practiced speed. First, I accessed the major credit bureaus. I initiated a total immediate freeze on my social security number. No one would be able to open a single new account, run a background check, or establish a new line of credit in my name ever again. Next, I opened the fraud portal for the Premium Wealth Management Bank that held the stolen credit line. I stared at the $48,000 balance on the screen. With a few quick taps, I reported the account as explicitly fraudulent. I flagged every single transaction as unauthorized identity theft. I locked the card completely. The physical plastic card my mother was undoubtedly carrying in her designer purse was now entirely worthless. I sat back in my car seat and stared out at the flashing neon sign of the motel. The night was freezing, but a strange, powerful sense of calm washed over my entire body. I had been kicked out of my home on Thanksgiving night. I had been called a parasite by the people who had stolen my money to fund their illusions of grandeur. On Monday morning, Chloe's luxury wedding planner was going to run the deposit charge for that exclusive Napa Valley vineyard on the stolen credit card. And the card was going to decline. My parents were about to face a very cold, very public reality. I turned off my phone, grabbed my bags from the trunk, and walked toward the motel lobby. I was finally free, and I was going to make sure they paid for every single thing they took from me. Monday morning arrived with the sharp, unforgiving clarity of a winter freeze. After spending my entire Thanksgiving weekend in a cheap motel room off the interstate, I walked into my accounting firm at exactly 8 in the morning. I wore a perfectly pressed navy suit. I held a hot cup of black coffee. I sat down at my polished mahogany desk, booted up my dual monitors, and logged into my secure terminal. Nobody in the office had any idea that I had just been thrown out of my childhood home. Nobody knew I was currently living out of 2 battered suitcases in the trunk of my car. To the rest of the world, I was Sarah, the meticulous senior forensic accountant who never made a mistake, and that was exactly the mindset I needed. I was no longer a rejected daughter. I was an auditor, and my family was a compromised ledger waiting to be reconciled. I knew the explosion was coming. I just had to wait for the fuse to burn down. At exactly 10:15 in the morning, my cell phone began to vibrate across the surface of my desk. The screen lit up with a photograph of my mother, Patricia. I did not answer it immediately. I let it ring. I picked up my coffee mug, took a slow, deliberate sip, and watched the screen go dark. 10 seconds later, the phone started vibrating again, then a third time, then a fourth. The sheer desperation radiating through the digital signals was almost palpable. On the fifth attempt, I picked up the phone and pressed the green button. I did not say hello. I just held the receiver to my ear and waited. Sarah, my mother, shrieked. Her voice was so loud and frantic that I had to pull the phone an inch away from my ear. You need to call the bank right this second. Call them right now and tell them it is a mistake. I kept my voice perfectly flat, a smooth corporate monotone. Tell them what is a mistake, Mom. Do not play dumb with me, she screamed, her breath hitching in a panic. I am standing inside the bridal boutique with Chloe and Bradley's mother. We just spent 2 hours picking out custom bridesmaid dresses. The luxury wedding planner just tried to run the $15,000 deposit for the vineyard in Napa Valley, and the card was declined. I leaned back in my leather ergonomic chair. I spun a silver pen between my fingers. Is that so? It declined twice. My mother yelled, her voice echoing as if she had rushed into a public restroom to hide from her wealthy future in-laws. The wedding planner said the bank flagged the account for severe fraud. They locked the entire credit line. Chloe is hyperventilating in the dressing room. Bradley's mother is asking extremely intrusive questions about our liquidity. You need to unlock that card right now. I took another slow sip of my coffee. The absolute audacity of her demand was almost majestic. She had stolen my identity. She had opened a massive line of credit in my name without my knowledge. She had maxed it out on luxury items. She had thrown me out into the freezing cold on Thanksgiving night. And now, she genuinely believed she could command me to authorize her felony fraud just to save herself from social embarrassment. I do not know what you are talking about, I said calmly. Why would I need to call the bank for a card that belongs to you? My mother let out a furious, ragged breath. Listen to me, you spiteful little brat. I know you are angry about what your father said on Thursday night. I know you are throwing a tantrum because we asked you to leave the house. But this is family business. We opened that premium credit card to handle the wedding expenses because your father's business credit is currently tied up in capital assets. It is a family asset. We used your name because you have that pristine credit score, but it is our money. You have absolutely no right to freeze our family asset. Call the fraud department and clear the security hold immediately, or you will ruin your sister's entire future. The sheer delusion in her logic was breathtaking. She had completely convinced herself that committing felony identity theft was just a creative method of family financial planning. I stopped spinning the silver pen. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the desk. Let me explain exactly what is going to happen right now, I said. My voice was no longer flat. It was sharp, cold, and entirely devoid of mercy. You are not going to yell at me. You are going to listen. Because if you interrupt me even once, I will hang up this phone and my next call will be to the federal authorities. My mother went dead silent. The threat of public humiliation had always been her greatest weakness, but the threat of actual prison time finally shut her up. I found the premium wealth management statement in Dad's office on Thursday night. I continued enunciating every single syllable with lethal precision. I know about the $50,000 credit limit. I know that you opened it using my social security number. I know about the $22,000 charge at the luxury jeweler for Chloe's engagement ring. I know about the $12,000 charge for Bradley's Rolex. I know about every single bridal boutique, every tasting fee, and every designer clothing charge you made to pretend you belong in Bradley's tax bracket. There was nothing but shallow, panicked breathing on the other end of the line. You committed felony identity theft, Mom, I said. You committed wire fraud. You stole my name to buy your way into high society while simultaneously charging me $1,500 a month to live in a damp basement. You called me a parasite while you were actively draining my financial blood. Sarah. Please, my mother whispered. Her voice was suddenly tiny, stripped of all its arrogant armor. You have to understand. Bradley's family is very prominent. If they find out we cannot afford this wedding, they will force him to call off the engagement. Chloe will be devastated. We were going to pay the card off. We just needed a little time for your father's contracting jobs to clear. We would never leave you with the bill. You are our daughter." I actually laughed. It was a dark, humorless sound that echoed off the walls of my office. "You threw your daughter out onto the street at midnight on Thanksgiving. You do not get to use that word anymore." I took a deep breath, preparing to drop the final devastating piece of evidence. "And do not lie to me about paying it off with Dad's contracting jobs," I said, dropping my voice to a terrifying whisper. I bumped the leather desk blotter when I was in the office. "I saw the mail you hid underneath it." I heard a sharp intake of breath. "I saw the final notice from the bank, Mom. I saw the notice of intent to foreclose. I know you have not paid the mortgage in 6 full months. I know you are completely broke. I know you are exactly 30 days away from the bank, ripping that house right out from under you." A choked, desperate sob broke through the receiver. My mother was finally crying. Not manipulative tears to get her way, but tears of absolute profound terror. Her entire fake reality had just been dismantled in under 3 minutes. "Sarah," my mother wept, her voice trembling so violently I could barely understand her. "Please, I am begging you. If Bradley's mother finds out we are bankrupt, the wedding is over. The social disgrace will literally kill your father. Please just unlock the card so we can pay the wedding planner today. We will figure the rest out later. I promise, I will do anything you want. Just do not let Chloe lose this wedding." My forensic accountant brain processed her plea with clinical detachment. Even now, standing on the absolute brink of total financial ruin, facing the loss of her home and potential federal prison time, her only genuine concern was saving face in front of a wealthy socialite. She did not care about the crimes she committed against me. She only cared about the optics of the luxury wedding venue. "Here is my ultimatum," I said. My voice was a block of solid ice. I have already flagged every single transaction on that card as fraudulent. The account is permanently locked and scheduled for closure. I am not calling the bank to clear it. I am leaving the fraud investigation open. You are going to have to find another way to pay that wedding planner today, or you can go out into that bridal boutique right now and confess to Bradley's mother that you are a broke, fraudulent liar. "No," my mother wailed. "Sarah, you cannot do this to us." "I am already doing it," I replied. "And here is the second part of the ultimatum. You are never going to contact me again. Do not call my phone. Do not text me. Do not show up at my accounting firm. Do not try to send Chloe or Dad to manipulate me. If you try to contact me even once, or if you try to open another account in my name, I will walk straight into the police precinct with the photographs I took of your hidden documents. I will press formal criminal charges for identity theft, and I will personally ensure that both you and Dad go to federal prison." I did not wait for her to respond. I did not give her the chance to beg, bargain, or scream. I pulled the phone away from my ear and pressed the red button ending the call. I placed the phone face down on my polished mahogany desk. The silence in my office was beautiful. I sat there for several minutes, letting my heart rate return to normal. I knew exactly what was going to happen next. I had handled enough corporate bankruptcy cases to know how desperate people behave when their backs are pushed against a wall. My parents were backed into the tightest corner imaginable. They had a luxury wedding planner demanding $15,000 in the next hour. They had a wealthy future mother-in-law sitting outside the dressing room, expecting them to easily cover the deposit, and they had absolutely no access to credit. They were going to panic, and they were going to make a catastrophic financial mistake. I opened a new tab on my secure computer terminal. I still had the login credentials for my parents' joint checking account. They had given me the passwords 3 years ago, so I could directly deposit my emergency bailouts and my monthly rent payments. They were far too technologically incompetent to change their passwords. I logged into the portal and stared at their dashboard. Their primary checking account had a balance of $412. Their savings account had $18. But linked at the very bottom of the page was my father's individual retirement account. It was a small portfolio he had built up during the early successful years of his contracting business. It was his absolute last safety net, meant to keep them afloat during their elderly years. The balance was exactly $32,000. I left the tab open on my second monitor and went back to my audit reports. I worked steadily for 3 hours, tracking missing corporate funds and building spreadsheets. But every 15 minutes, my eyes flicked over to the banking dashboard. At exactly 1:45 in the afternoon, the numbers on the screen changed. I watched in real time as my parents committed total financial suicide. They executed an emergency early withdrawal from my father's retirement account. Because my father was not yet of retirement age, the early withdrawal triggered massive immediate tax penalties. He liquidated the entire $32,000. After the federal penalties and the emergency transfer fees were automatically deducted by the brokerage, exactly $21,000 landed in their primary checking account. 10 minutes later, a wire transfer for $15,000 was initiated. The recipient name listed on the bank ledger was the luxury wedding planning agency in Napa Valley. I stared at the glowing numbers on the screen, a chilling mixture of horror and vindication settling in my chest. They actually did it. They were so terrified of the police, so absolutely desperate to keep up appearances for Bradley's elite family, that they had drained the very last drop of their liquid assets just to pay for a party. They had $21,000 left to their name. They spent $15,000 of it on a venue deposit. That left them with exactly $6,000. The notice of intent to foreclose had clearly stated that they owed over $14,000 in back mortgage payments and late fees. They needed $14,000 to stop the bank from seizing the house. They had the money in the retirement account this morning. They could have paid the mortgage. They could have saved the roof over their heads. But they chose to save their ego instead. By draining that retirement account to pay the wedding planner, they had completely sealed their own fate. They had absolutely nothing left. The foreclosure on my childhood home was no longer just a threat. It was a mathematical certainty. My cell phone buzzed on the desk. It was a notification from my voicemail inbox. I had blocked both of my parents' numbers immediately after hanging up on my mother, but blocked numbers could still leave voice messages. I put my phone on speaker and pressed play. The audio was filled with heavy, furious breathing. It was my father. "You selfish, vindictive brat!" My father snarled, his voice thick with raw hatred. "I hope you are happy. You forced our hand. Your mother was having a panic attack in front of Bradley's mother. We had to liquidate the very last of my retirement account and take a massive tax penalty just to save your sister from public humiliation. We paid the planner. The wedding is secured. But you are dead to us. Do you hear me? Do not ever show your face near this family again. You are nothing to us." The voicemail clicked off. I reached out and deleted the message. I did not feel sad. I did not feel rejected. I looked at the banking dashboard one last time, verifying that their account was entirely depleted. Then I opened a new document on my computer and began drafting the incorporation paperwork for a brand new anonymous real estate holding company. My father was right about one thing. I was going to stay far away from their family, but I was going to keep a very close eye on the county courthouse auction records. The countdown to their total destruction had just officially begun. 3 months passed. It was late February. The harsh winter frost was finally beginning to thaw across the city, giving way to cold, persistent rain. My life had completely transformed since Thanksgiving night. I was no longer living in a damp, poorly ventilated basement. I had signed a 12-month lease on a beautiful, light-filled apartment just 3 blocks away from my accounting firm. I bought brand new furniture. I decorated the space exactly how I wanted it. I slept peacefully through the night, without listening to my father pacing the floorboards above my head, stressing about the massive debts he continuously brought upon himself. But while I was moving forward and building a life of my own, I was also keeping a very close, calculated eye on the past. Every single morning at exactly 8:30 before I opened my corporate client ledgers or drank my first cup of coffee, I logged into the county clerk public records portal. Foreclosures do not happen overnight. The banking system moves slowly and deliberately. They send warning letters. They issue 30-day grace periods. They attempt to work out payment plans to avoid taking possession of the property. But because my parents had completely drained their last remaining retirement account to pay a luxury wedding planner, they had absolutely zero capital left to negotiate with the bank. They had played their final card. I knew it was only a matter of time before the system caught up with their arrogance. On a rainy Tuesday morning, the inevitable finally happened. I typed my father's legal name into the public registry search bar, just like I had done for 90 consecutive days. The digital screen refreshed. A brand new officially stamped document had been filed with the county. The title read, Notice of Default and Intention to Sell. I clicked on the digital file and read through the dense legal jargon with immense satisfaction. The bank had officially initiated formal foreclosure proceedings on my childhood home. The massive, beautiful house where my parents currently lived was legally scheduled to be sold at a public courthouse auction in exactly 90 days. The mathematical finality of the document was beautiful to witness. My parents had ignored all the warnings. They had prioritized their fragile egos over their basic shelter. Now their private financial ruin was a matter of public record. Anyone in the county with an internet connection could look up their name and see that they were completely bankrupt. Of course, my mother was never going to let the truth destroy her precious social standing. Patricia was an absolute master of spinning reality to fit her preferred narrative. I found out exactly how she was handling her impending crisis 2 days later when I ran into an old family acquaintance. I was standing in line at a high-end local bakery near my firm, waiting to buy a pastry, when I heard a familiar voice call my name loudly across the shop. It was Mrs. Gable, a prominent and very wealthy elder from the church my parents attended every single Sunday. Mrs. Gable was highly connected in the community and completely obsessed with neighborhood gossip. She walked over, hugged me tightly, and immediately gave me a look of deep, patronizing pity. "Oh, Sarah," she sighed, clutching her expensive leather handbag against her chest. "Your mother told us you moved out so suddenly right after the holidays. We are all just praying for you during this difficult transition." I kept my expression perfectly pleasant, forcing a polite smile, and asked her exactly what she meant by that. "Well, Patricia mentioned at the Sunday committee meeting that you abruptly abandoned the family basement to live in the city," Mrs. Gable said, lowering her voice and leaning in close to my face. "She said you felt incredibly overshadowed by Chloe marrying into the prominent Weston family, and you just needed space to process your jealousy." Patricia was practically in tears during the service. She told the entire congregation that the house is simply too big and empty now that you are gone. She said they are planning to put the property on the market and downsize before the wedding. They just want a fresh start for this new chapter of their lives. The sheer audacity of the lie almost made me laugh right there in the middle of the bakery. My mother was laying the psychological groundwork for their inevitable eviction. She knew perfectly well that they were going to lose the house. She knew the bank was going to physically remove them from the premises. So she was planting a fake narrative in the minds of everyone she knew. She was telling the church, her friends, and Bradley's elite family that selling the house was a deliberate, voluntary lifestyle choice. She was framing herself as a heartbroken, empty nester who wanted to downsize rather than a fraudulent debtor being thrown out onto the street by a bank. It was a brilliant, desperate performance. She was fiercely protecting her image for the upcoming wedding. She desperately needed Bradley's wealthy parents to believe they were marrying into an equally successful, financially stable family. If the Westons found out my parents were facing a brutal public foreclosure, the social disgrace would be catastrophic. Bradley would likely cancel the engagement to protect his family name. So my mother doubled down on the illusion, completely ignoring the ticking clock of the courthouse auction. I thanked Mrs. Gable for her prayers, bought my coffee, and walked briskly back to my office. My mother thought she could spin a web of lies and walk away entirely clean. She thought she could hide her total financial collapse behind the convenient excuse of downsizing. I decided right then and there that I was not going to let her control the narrative. I was going to turn her fake story into a very real, inescapable nightmare. To do that, I needed to operate completely in the shadows. I picked up my office phone and called a man named David. David was a senior partner at a private real estate holding firm that frequently collaborated with my accounting agency. He specialized in acquiring distressed properties, flipping them, and managing commercial portfolios. I invited him to a private lunch at a quiet steakhouse downtown and laid my cards on the table. I told him all about the upcoming foreclosure auction. I explained the exact market value of my parents' house, the current neighborhood comparable sales, and the massive potential profit margin if the property was acquired at auction for cash and flipped. David listened carefully while cutting his steak, his sharp business instincts immediately engaged. The numbers made perfect sense. It was a highly lucrative investment opportunity with minimal risk. But I had one strict, non-negotiable condition. My personal name could never appear on a single public document. I could not buy the house as Sarah. If my parents saw my name on the bidder list, they would scream to the heavens. They would try to emotionally manipulate me. They would play the victim card and drag the eviction process out through the local courts for months. I needed an impenetrable corporate shield to hide behind. David smiled broadly and told me it was the easiest thing in the world to arrange for an accountant of my caliber. We spent the next 3 weeks building a complete ghost entity. Using my extensive knowledge of corporate tax law and David's aggressive real estate legal connections, we registered a brand new limited liability company in the state of Delaware. Delaware offers extremely robust privacy protections for corporate officers. No one searching the public registry would ever be able to trace the holding company back to me. We named the company Apex Horizon Holdings. I liquidated the remaining $40,000 in my high-yield savings account. I combined my cash with a substantial hard money bridge loan secured through David's private lending network. Apex Horizon Holdings was now fully funded, completely anonymous, and legally prepared to bid on distressed residential real estate. My childhood home was the absolute only target on our corporate acquisition list. As the rainy spring months slowly rolled by, I watched the foreclosure timeline progress with clinical detached fascination. The bank published the mandatory legal notices in the local newspaper, buried in the back pages where my mother would never look. They officially posted the auction date. My parents did absolutely nothing to stop the process. They did not hire a bankruptcy attorney. They did not attempt a short sale. I drove past the house one evening in late April just to see what they were doing. I parked my car down the street, keeping my vehicle hidden in the deep shadows of the large oak trees. The house looked exactly the same as it had on Thanksgiving night. The expansive front lawn was perfectly manicured. My mother had planted fresh, colorful spring flowers along the brick walkway to keep up appearances for the neighbors. Chloe's expensive car was parked in the pristine driveway. Through the large front window, I could clearly see the blue glow of the television illuminating the living room. They were living in a complete state of absolute denial. They genuinely believed that if they just ignored the threatening bank letters, the problem would magically disappear. They thought they could stall the bank's legal department until after Chloe's luxury destination wedding in Napa Valley. They truly thought they were untouchable. I sat alone in my car and looked at the massive house where I had spent my entire life being treated like a disposable second-class citizen. I looked at the small, dark basement window where I had lived and paid them rent while they called me a parasite and stole my identity. In just a few short weeks, the county sheriff would stand on the courthouse steps and auction that entire property off to the highest bidder. My parents proudly thought they were going to gracefully downsize on their own terms and walk away with their social dignity intact. They had absolutely no idea that a faceless corporation called Apex Horizon Holdings was waiting patiently in the dark, ready to buy the very ground beneath their feet. They did not know that the dutiful daughter they threw away like garbage had become their absolute worst financial nightmare. I put the car in drive and pulled away from the curb. The auction was coming, and I was going to win. The morning of the county foreclosure auction was unseasonably warm for early May. The bright sunlight illuminated the heavy stone pillars of the municipal courthouse, casting long, dramatic shadows across the concrete steps. I parked my car across the street, keeping the engine running, and the windows rolled down just enough to hear the ambient noise of the city. I wore a pair of dark sunglasses and sipped from a paper cup of black coffee. My heart was beating with a steady, rhythmic thud. Today was the day the bank officially severed my parents from the fake reality they had built. Today was the day their massive, beautiful suburban home was sold to the highest bidder. I knew my parents were not going to show up. I had profiled their psychological state perfectly. People like Richard and Patricia do not attend public foreclosure auctions because attending means acknowledging their own failure. In my father's mind, the entire situation was just a temporary clerical error. He had undoubtedly convinced my mother that the terrifying letters from the bank were simply automated computer mistakes generated by a faceless corporate machine. He probably told her that he was going to call the bank president, a man he played golf with, exactly once 5 years ago and have the whole thing sorted out over a glass of expensive scotch. My mother, desperate to maintain her pristine social image for Bradley's elite family, willingly swallowed the lie. They stayed home drinking their morning coffee in their gourmet kitchen, completely oblivious to the fact that a county trustee was currently standing on the courthouse steps, holding a clipboard that contained the legal right to their entire existence. I watched from the safety of my car as a small crowd began to gather around the trustee. There were about 10 people in total. Most of them were seasoned local real estate flippers. They wore casual clothes and carried thick manila folders, hovering like vultures waiting to pick the meat off a decaying financial carcass. And standing perfectly still at the back of the group was David. David was the senior partner at the private real estate holding firm I had collaborated with to create my anonymous corporation. He wore an immaculate charcoal suit and held a certified cashier's check inside his breast pocket. He was there acting as the official purchasing proxy for Apex Horizon Holdings. I was the sole managing member and absolute owner of the Apex, but my name existed nowhere on the public bidding registry. I was a ghost operating a very real, very lethal financial machine. My cell phone buzzed in my lap. It was a text message from David. He wrote that the trustee was reading the preliminary disclosures and our target property was up next. I typed back a single word, telling him to execute the plan. I rolled my window down an inch further. The trustee cleared his throat and read the address of my childhood home aloud. The address where I was treated like a second-class citizen. The address where I paid rent to sleep in a damp basement. The address I was thrown out of at midnight on Thanksgiving. Hearing those street numbers read aloud in a public foreclosure auction sent a wave of pure, chilling satisfaction straight down my spine. The trustee announced the opening bid. The bank had set the absolute minimum price to exactly match the outstanding mortgage balance, the unpaid property taxes, and the accumulated legal penalties. Because my parents had recklessly drained their retirement account to pay a luxury wedding planner, they had missed so many payments that the opening bid was shockingly low. It was less than half of the actual market value of the property. One of the local flippers immediately raised his hand and offered a bid exactly $1,000 over the minimum. He was hoping to steal the property quietly and flip it for a massive profit. A second flipper standing near the stairs countered with a bid $5,000 higher. They began a slow, cautious back-and-forth rhythm, testing the waters, trying to secure a bargain. I watched David step forward. He did not raise his hand. He simply spoke in a clear, booming voice that echoed across the stone courtyard. He offered a cash bid that was precisely $50,000 higher than the current offer. The two local flippers turned to stare at him. One of them shook his head in disgust, realizing he was suddenly dealing with institutional corporate money rather than a neighborhood amateur. The other flipper hesitated, clearly running the profit margins in his head before crossing his arms and stepping back into the crowd. Nobody else spoke. The sheer aggression of David's bid had completely suffocated the competition. The trustee looked around the courtyard. He called out the price once, twice, and then a third time. He struck his pen against his clipboard. The auction was officially closed. I leaned back against my leather car seat and let out a long, shuddering breath. It was done. The gavel had fallen. The transaction was complete. Apex Horizon Holdings had just purchased the sprawling, luxurious estate for absolute pennies on the dollar. The bank was completely satisfied because their bad debt was cleared in an instant cash transaction, and I was now the sole, undisputed legal owner of the house my parents were currently sitting inside. 10 minutes later, David walked over to my car and climbed into the passenger seat. He handed me a thick, sealed envelope. Inside was the preliminary deed of sale and the transfer receipt from the county clerk. "Congratulations, Sarah David," said a sharp professional smile crossing his face. "The property belongs to Apex Horizon Holdings, free and clear. The title company will finalize the recording by the end of the week. Do you want my legal team to draft the standard 72-hour eviction notice? We can have the county sheriff physically remove them from the premises by Friday morning." I looked down at the documents in my lap. The urge to kick them out immediately was incredibly tempting. I pictured my mother screaming as sheriff deputies carried her expensive dining room table out onto the front lawn. I pictured my father desperately trying to explain the eviction to his neighbors. It would be a brutal, fast, and highly effective revenge. But a fast revenge was not what I wanted. If I evicted them right now, my mother would instantly play the victim card. She would call Bradley's wealthy parents and sob about a predatory corporate bank ruining their lives right before Chloe's beautiful wedding. She would spin a tragic narrative that would likely result in Bradley's family graciously stepping in to help them financially. I could not let them walk away with their social dignity intact. I needed them to hang themselves with their own arrogance. I needed them to feel completely safe and secure so they would continue making catastrophic, irreversible mistakes. "No," I told David, keeping my voice perfectly steady. "Do not draft an eviction notice. I want your legal department to draft a month-to-month residential lease agreement. I want Apex Horizon Holdings to officially offer them the opportunity to stay in the house as paying tenants." David raised an eyebrow, clearly surprised by my strategy. "You want to let the people who stole your identity continue living in your investment property." I looked out the windshield toward the courthouse. "I want them to sign a legally binding contract that explicitly forbids any unpermitted alterations or structural damage to the property. Set the monthly rent slightly below market value so they think they are getting a miraculous corporate bailout. Make them feel like they won the lottery. If they sign that lease, they are no longer just squatting in a foreclosed home. They become legal tenants bound by incredibly strict corporate rules." And knowing my mother and her desperate need to impress Bradley's family for this wedding, she will absolutely break those rules. David studied my face for a long moment before nodding slowly. "You are handing them enough rope to hang themselves in front of everyone they know. It is a brilliant strategy. I will have the corporate lease drawn up and delivered by certified courier the moment the title clears." 3 days later, the title officially recorded. Apex Horizon Holdings was the legal owner on the municipal register. That same afternoon, a uniformed courier pulled up to my childhood home and handed a thick, pristine corporate envelope directly to my father. I was sitting at my desk at the accounting firm when the text message from David arrived, confirming the delivery was complete. I closed my eyes and imagined the scene unfolding in their living room. My father, opening the letter, the initial shock of realizing the bank had actually sold the house out from under him, the sheer terror of thinking he was about to be thrown out into the street, and then the miraculous, intoxicating relief of reading the second page. The letter from Apex Horizon Holdings was a masterpiece of corporate diplomacy. It formally introduced the holding company as the new owner of the property. It stated that Apex specialized in acquiring high-value residential assets for long-term portfolio growth. And then it offered a lifeline. The letter explained that the corporation vastly preferred having reliable, established caretakers, maintaining the property, rather than leaving the estate vacant. It offered Richard and Patricia a month-to-month lease at a very reasonable rate, allowing them to remain in the home uninterrupted. I knew exactly how my father's narcissistic brain would process that letter. He would not see it as a humiliating demotion from homeowner to tenant. He would see it as a validation of his own importance. I did not have to wait long to see the results of my psychological trap. Later that evening, I logged into a secondary anonymous social media account I used to monitor the situation. I navigated to my mother's public profile page. She had never been able to resist bragging to her hundreds of church friends and neighborhood acquaintances. Sure enough, sitting right at the top of her feed was a brand new, highly filtered photograph of my father holding a glass of expensive wine in their living room. The caption beneath the photo was dripping with absolute sickening hubris. My mother had written an elaborate, entirely fictional story for her audience. She claimed that a massive, wealthy private investment group had recently approached Richard with a highly lucrative offer to purchase the estate. She lied and said the offer was simply too good to refuse, so they decided to sell the property off-market. But she added with a flurry of joyful emojis. The corporate investors were so incredibly impressed with how beautifully Richard and Patricia maintained the estate that the company literally begged them to stay on as private caretakers. She bragged that they were now living completely stress-free with all the benefits of the luxury home and a generous corporate partner handling all the tedious ownership details. She ended the post by reminding everyone that the countdown to Chloe and Bradley's spectacular Napa Valley wedding was officially on. I read the post 3 times, a slow, dark smile spreading across my face. It was working perfectly. My mother was successfully selling the illusion of elite wealth to her entire social circle and to Bradley's family. She was constructing a massive house of cards built entirely on a foundation of lies. They truly believed they had completely outsmarted the banking system. They thought a faceless, benevolent corporation had swooped in to save them from their own financial crimes. They had absolutely no idea that the generous corporate investor they were currently bragging about was the very same daughter they had thrown into the freezing street on Thanksgiving. They did not know that every single month they paid their rent. The money was depositing directly into a corporate treasury account controlled entirely by me. I was officially their landlord, their master, and the silent architect of their impending destruction. I closed the social media application and shut down my computer for the night. The month-to-month lease agreement had been signed and returned to David's office. The trap was officially set and the lock was engaged. Chloe's wedding was quickly approaching. The pressure to impress Bradley's affluent parents was going to increase exponentially over the next few weeks. I knew my mother. I knew her desperate pathological need to perform wealth. She was never going to be satisfied with simply maintaining the house as a tenant. She was going to do something drastically arrogant to ensure the property looked like a millionaire's mansion for the post-wedding celebrations. And the moment she violated the ironclad terms of her new lease, the generous corporate investor was going to transform into a merciless executioner. I turned off the lights in my office and walked out into the cool evening air, ready to wait for them to make their final, fatal mistake. Chloe's wedding was exactly 1 month away. The countdown was ticking loud enough for me to hear it all the way from my office in the city. My mother was operating in a state of absolute frantic mania. She had successfully convinced herself that the entire foreclosure nightmare was just a bad dream that had magically vanished. She truly believed that her new corporate landlord was a silent benefactor who adored her family. Because I had deliberately set the rent slightly below market value, my parents felt completely flush with cash. They felt untouchable. But the pressure to maintain their wealthy facade was about to push my mother over the edge of sanity. Bradley's parents were flying in from New York for the wedding weekend. The Weston family represented generational wealth. They owned commercial real estate in Manhattan, wintered in the Swiss Alps, and viewed anyone outside their tax bracket with polite disdain. My mother was absolutely terrified of them. She was obsessed with proving that the bride's family was just as elite as the groom's family. To accomplish this, Patricia had taken it upon herself to host a massive, lavish post-wedding brunch at the house on the Sunday morning following the ceremony. She had invited Bradley's entire extended family to our home. She wanted them to walk through the front doors and be blinded by our supposed wealth. There was only one problem. The house was a classic older colonial build. It featured a formal enclosed dining room separated from the main living room by a massive, thick interior wall. It was a beautiful layout for the era it was built in, but it was not the bright, airy aesthetic you see in modern luxury magazines. My mother looked at that dividing wall and decided it was entirely too dated. She decided she needed a sprawling, open-concept, entertaining space to impress Bradley's mother. She wanted the guests to flow seamlessly from the living room to the dining room while sipping mimosas. Any rational human being who is currently renting a foreclosed home on a month-to-month lease would never dream of making structural changes. But my mother was not rational. She was a narcissist drowning in her own delusions. She viewed the lease from Apex Horizon Holdings as a mere technicality. In her mind, it was still her house. She decided to tear the wall down. because they had absolutely zero access to traditional bank credit. After the foreclosure, my father could not hire a legitimate licensed construction firm. A licensed firm would have pulled the property records, realized my father was not the legal owner, and demanded written consent from the holding company. A licensed firm would have also pulled the architectural blueprints and immediately informed my parents that the wall separating the living room and the dining room was not just a partition. It was a primary load-bearing wall. It was physically holding up the entire second-floor master bedroom. But my mother did not care about structural engineering. She only cared about aesthetics. So my father hired a shady, unlicensed, cash-only contractor who worked out of an unmarked van. This crew did not ask for proof of ownership. They did not pull city blueprints. They did not file for municipal construction permits. My parents promised to pay them an exorbitant amount of money under the table, likely securing the funds through a predatory, high-interest payday loan, or draining whatever tiny scraps of cash they had managed to scrape together since the foreclosure. They hired men to walk into a house they did not own and swing sledgehammers into the primary structural supports. I found out about my mother's catastrophic hubris on a Thursday afternoon. I was sitting at my desk at the accounting firm running a complex tax audit for a client when my cell phone rang. It was David, the senior partner at the real estate firm, who acted as the public face for my anonymous holding company. Sarah, David said, his voice completely devoid of its usual calm professionalism. "We have a massive problem at your property. I just received a phone call from the Municipal Code Enforcement Office." I stopped typing and sat up straight. "What kind of problem?" "One of your parents' neighbors called the city complaint line this morning," David explained. The neighbor was angry because a massive industrial-sized debris dumpster was illegally parked on the street, blocking the sidewalk. A city code inspector drove out to issue a standard parking citation, but when the inspector got out of his vehicle, he looked through the front window of your house and saw a crew of unlicensed workers ripping out massive wooden support beams. A cold shock washed over my entire body. Support beams. Are they tearing down walls? The inspector said they are actively demolishing the central load-bearing wall on the ground floor, David said, sounding genuinely horrified. "Sarah, they did not pull a single permit. The city flagged the property in their database and immediately called me because Apex Horizon Holdings is listed as the registered legal owner." The inspector was furious. He said the structural integrity of the entire second floor is currently compromised. He wanted to know why our corporation was conducting illegal, unpermitted demolition. I stared at the wall of my office, my forensic accountant brain rapidly processing the sheer magnitude of their stupidity. The lease agreement I had meticulously drafted was incredibly strict. It contained an ironclad, non-negotiable clause stating that the tenants were strictly forbidden from driving a single nail into the wall without written, notarized corporate consent. Any unpermitted alterations, let alone the total destruction of a structural support beam, constituted a terminal lease violation. I was furious that they were damaging my asset, but beneath that anger, a dark, brilliant realization began to bloom. My parents had just handed me the ultimate weapon. David was breathing heavily into the phone. "Sarah, I need you to authorize me to send a cease and desist order right now. I will call the sheriff. We can have the police shut the construction down before they cause any more structural damage. We can issue a notice to cure the lease violation today." I closed my eyes and visualized the layout of the house. I knew exactly which wall they were tearing down. I knew the damage could be repaired by a licensed structural engineer later. It would be expensive, but I had the capital to fix it. My parents, however, did not. They were incurring massive debt to pay a shady crew for this demolition. If I stopped them now, they would just get a slap on the wrist. They would claim it was a misunderstanding. I needed them to cross the point of absolutely no return. I needed them to be so deep in the financial and legal trap that they could never, ever escape. "No," I told David, my voice dropping to a cool, calculated whisper. "Do not call the police. Do not send a cease and desist. Do not contact them at all." David went completely silent. "Sarah, you are the property owner. They are destroying a load-bearing wall. If the second floor sags, the repair costs will be astronomical. I will gladly pay the repair costs." "Out of my own pocket," I replied. "Let them finish the demolition. Let them tear the wall down to the studs." Let them haul the debris into the dumpster. Let them incur the massive contractor debt to pay that shady crew. I want them to spend every single dime they have left on this open concept dining room. David let out a slow, astonished breath. You are letting them dig their own grave. I am handing them the shovel, I said. Thank the city inspector for the notification. Tell him that our corporation was completely unaware of the rogue tenant activity, and we are launching an immediate internal legal investigation. Ask the city to hold off on posting a red stop work order on the front door for just a few more days. Tell them we are handling the eviction privately. I hung up the phone and leaned back in my leather chair. A wave of pure, chilling adrenaline flooded my veins. My mother was so incredibly desperate to impress a group of wealthy New York socialites that she was physically destroying a home she did not own. She was blindly setting the stage for her own public execution. When my workday ended, I did not go straight to my apartment. I got into my car and drove out to the suburbs. I parked 2 blocks away from my childhood home, pulling my vehicle into the shadows of a large oak tree. I turned off the engine and rolled down my window. The sound of electric saws and heavy sledgehammers echoed down the quiet suburban street. The massive metal debris dumpster was indeed parked illegally on the curb, overflowing with shattered drywall, torn wallpaper, and jagged pieces of structural timber. I watched as a man covered in white dust walked out the front door, carrying a heavy load of broken wood. Behind him, standing in the open doorway, was my mother. She was holding a cup of tea, pointing her finger, and giving sharp, arrogant directions to the workers. She looked incredibly proud of herself. She looked like a wealthy matriarch overseeing the grand renovation of her magnificent estate. She had absolutely no idea that she was standing inside a trap that had already snapped shut. By initiating an unpermitted illegal demolition on a foreclosed property she was renting month to month, she had completely destroyed any legal leverage she might have had. If I had simply evicted them for missing rent, they could have dragged the process out in housing court for months. They could have claimed financial hardship, but destroying the physical structure of the home was a zero-tolerance offense. Judges do not grant extensions to tenants who take sledgehammers to load-bearing walls. Furthermore, I knew my father was funding this disaster with money he did not have. He was either writing bad checks to this shady crew, or he had taken out an unsecured loan with brutal interest rates. They were completely draining themselves dry, just to serve mimosas in an open room. They were trading their actual shelter for the temporary illusion of high society status. I sat in my car for an hour, watching the dust billow out of the front door of my property. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. Every swing of the sledgehammer was a nail in their social coffin. I pulled my cell phone out and opened my calendar. Chloe's luxury destination wedding in Napa Valley was exactly 1 month away. My parents were planning to fly to California, host the magnificent ceremony, and then fly back with Bradley's entire extended family for the grand post-wedding brunch in their newly renovated home. I began typing a message to my real estate attorney. I did not want to issue the eviction notice today. I wanted to maximize the psychological impact. I wanted to strike when they were at the absolute height of their arrogance. I instructed my attorney to draft a formal, immediate notice to quit. The legal grounds would be severe, unpermitted destruction of corporate property and gross violation of the commercial lease agreement. But I gave my attorney very specific instructions regarding the delivery date. I told him to hold the legal documents in his desk. He was not to serve them until exactly 3 days before Chloe's wedding. I wanted my mother to finish the drywall. I wanted her to paint the new open space. I wanted her to buy the expensive floral arrangements for the brunch. I wanted her to feel the absolute peak of triumphant satisfaction. And then, right when she thought she had successfully conned the entire world, I was going to pull the floor out from under her. I started the engine of my car and put it in drive. I took one last look at the dusty, chaotic construction site that used to be my family home. My mother waved her hand at a worker completely oblivious to the fact that her daughter was watching her from the shadows, silently tallying the cost of her ruin. I drove back to the city with a cold, peaceful smile on my face. The trap was fully constructed. The bait had been taken. All I had to do now was wait for the wedding bells to ring. 3 days before Chloe was scheduled to walk down the aisle, the trap I had carefully constructed finally snapped shut. It was a Wednesday morning. I sat in the sleek, glass-walled conference room of my real estate attorney, reviewing the final drafts of the legal execution. The air in the room was quiet and focused. I held a sleek pen in my hand, staring down at the thick stack of documents that would officially initiate the total destruction of my parents' fake reality. They had played right into my hands. Not only had they destroyed a load-bearing wall without a single city permit, but they had also completely drained their bank accounts to pay the shady demolition crew. Because they were so completely leveraged, they had missed their first rent payment to my holding company. They were officially in default on their corporate lease. My attorney, a sharp, unsmiling man named Harrison, slid the first document across the polished table. It was the formal 30-day notice to quit. This was the absolute non-negotiable eviction order. It cited 2 immediate, uncurable lease violations. First, the failure to pay the agreed-upon monthly rent. Second, the gross, unauthorized destruction of corporate property. It demanded that Richard and Patricia vacate the premises entirely. Harrison then slid the second document forward. It was an official municipal stop work order, procured directly from the City Code Enforcement Division, demanding an immediate halt to all illegal construction on the property. I signed my corporate proxy signature on the required lines. I did not feel a single ounce of hesitation. I authorized Harrison to deploy a licensed process server to hand-deliver the eviction notice directly to my father, and I instructed the city to tape the bright red stop work order right onto the glass of their custom mahogany front door. I knew exactly how the delivery went down because the process server provided a highly detailed, legally mandated report later that afternoon. My father answered the door, wearing a pair of expensive golf slacks, holding a cup of gourmet coffee. When the server handed him the thick legal envelope from Apex Horizon Holdings, my father actually smiled, assuming it was a letter of congratulations or a corporate gift basket for the upcoming wedding. When he tore the envelope open and read the bold, stark words declaring his formal eviction, the blood completely drained from his face. But I knew my father's psychological profile better than anyone. A normal, rational human being faced with an immediate eviction and a city-mandated stop work order would panic. They would call the holding company begging for a resolution. They would cancel the lavish post-wedding brunch. My father was not a rational human being. He was a narcissist entirely consumed by the need to maintain his social status in front of Bradley's elite New York family. To accept the reality of the eviction notice would mean accepting that he was a bankrupt failure. So my father did exactly what I knew he would do. He completely denied reality. According to the neighborhood gossip I quietly monitored through social media, my father marched right back into the house, looked at my mother, and physically tore the eviction notice into tiny pieces. He told Patricia it was nothing but a massive, ridiculous clerical error made by some low-level corporate desk worker at the holding company. He assured her that Apex Horizon Holdings loved having them as caretakers. He confidently promised that he would simply call the corporate office on Monday morning after the extravagant wedding weekend concluded and have the silly misunderstanding cleared up with a quick apology from the company president. My mother eagerly swallowed the lie because the alternative was facing total social annihilation. She completely ignored the bright red municipal stop work order taped to her front door. She convinced herself that the city inspector was just a jealous bureaucrat trying to ruin her beautiful daughter's perfect weekend. But the stop work order presented a massive logistical problem for her precious post-wedding brunch. The shady, unlicensed contractor my father hired had fled the site the moment the city inspector showed up, leaving the living room completely gutted. The load-bearing wall was gone, leaving exposed electrical wires, raw wooden studs, and dangerous structural gaps, right where Bradley's wealthy parents were supposed to be sipping premium mimosas. Instead of admitting defeat, my mother doubled down on her absolute delusion. She sent my father to a local hardware store to buy cheap temporary drywall panels. Because they could not afford to hire a professional to install them, my father spent the night before his daughter's wedding frantically nailing raw drywall over the gaping holes in the house. He did not tape the seams. He did not paint the boards. He just slapped them up to cover the exposed wires. To disguise the incredibly shoddy, unfinished construction zone, my mother drove to a craft store and purchased dozens of cheap twinkling string lights and massive fake floral vines. She draped the fairy lights and the plastic vines all over the raw drywall, desperately trying to make the destroyed living room look like a deliberate, rustic, bohemian aesthetic. It was a pathetic, frantic Band-Aid applied to a gaping financial wound. They were literally decorating their own sinking ship. I let them spin their wheels. I let them exhaust themselves hanging fairy lights over illegal demolition. I did not reach out. I did not correct their assumption about the clerical error. I simply waited for Saturday to arrive. The wedding ceremony was held at the most massive, opulent cathedral in the affluent historic district of the city. The stone arches reached high into the sky, and the entrance was flanked by imported white roses that cost more than my first car. Bradley's parents had spared absolutely no expense for the religious ceremony, eager to show off their wealth to the local society elites. My parents had invited hundreds of guests, desperately pretending they were contributing equally to the grand spectacle. I did not receive an invitation. I was formally banned from the event by my own family. But churches are public sanctuaries, and I had absolutely no intention of missing the performance. I arrived at the cathedral 30 minutes after the ceremony began. I wore a perfectly tailored, understated charcoal suit. I walked quietly through the heavy wooden doors and slipped into the very back row of the massive sanctuary. The church was packed with men in expensive tuxedos and women in designer gowns. The air was thick with the scent of expensive perfume and fresh lilies. I sat in the shadows of a large stone pillar, making sure I was completely out of the direct line of sight of the altar. Far down the center aisle, standing beneath the glowing stained glass windows, was my sister. Chloe wore a custom designer wedding gown covered in French lace and thousands of hand-sewn crystals. She looked like a princess stepping out of a luxury bridal magazine. Bradley stood beside her, looking incredibly smug and self-important. And seated in the front pew, occupying the position of ultimate honor, were my parents. My father wore a brand new tuxedo that he had undoubtedly purchased on a high-interest store credit card. My mother wore a lavish sequined gown, her posture stiff with pride. They were practically glowing with triumph. As far as they were concerned, they had won. They had successfully navigated the foreclosure. They had successfully fended off the city inspectors. They had successfully hidden their bankruptcy behind temporary drywall and fairy lights. They were officially tying their family name to the immense wealth of the Weston real estate empire. I sat quietly in the back row, my face completely expressionless, watching them flaunt their fake wealth. I watched my father shake hands with the wealthy men around him. I watched my mother dab her eyes with a silk handkerchief playing the perfect emotional matriarch. It was a spectacular, sickening display of total narcissism. They truly believed they were untouchable. They had no idea that the silent observer sitting in the back pew held the absolute legal power to render them completely homeless in a matter of hours. As the ceremony concluded and the massive pipe organ began to play the recessional march, the congregation stood to their feet. The newly married couple walked down the center aisle, followed closely by the bridal party and the parents. I remained standing in the back row, partially concealed by the stone pillar. My mother walked arm in arm with Bradley's father. She was laughing brightly, her head thrown back, radiating complete victory. As they neared the back of the cathedral, her eyes swept across the crowd, taking in the admiring faces of her church friends and neighborhood acquaintances. And then her gaze snagged on the shadows of the back pew. She saw me. My mother stopped walking for a fraction of a second. Her smile instantly vanished. The blood drained from her face, leaving her looking suddenly old and terrified. For one brief, beautiful moment, the reality of what she had done to me flashed in her eyes. But Patricia was incapable of genuine remorse. Her terror quickly morphed into bitter, defensive fury. She could not handle the fact that the daughter she had thrown out on Thanksgiving night was standing in the church looking polished, successful, and entirely unfazed. She quickly regained her composure and leaned toward Mrs. Gable, the prominent church elder who had confronted me at the bakery months ago. Mrs. Gable was standing just a few feet away from my pew, clutching her church program. My mother pointed a manicured finger discreetly in my direction. She leaned in close to Mrs. Gable and spoke in a harsh, toxic whisper that was loud enough for me to hear clearly over the sound of the pipe organ. "Do not look now," my mother whispered bitterly. But Sarah actually showed up. Can you believe the absolute nerve of that girl? She's just standing there in the back. She is so incredibly jealous of Chloe's beautiful life that she could not stay away. She is probably just crawling back to see if she can beg for a handout now that we are officially joined with the Weston family. Just ignore her. We are not letting her toxic energy ruin our perfect weekend. Mrs. Gable shot me a look of profound judgmental pity before turning back to my mother and nodding in deep theatrical sympathy. They both turned their backs to me and continued walking toward the massive cathedral doors, eager to head to the luxury reception where they could continue playing their wealthy roles. I did not feel angry. I did not feel hurt. I did not feel the crushing weight of rejection that I used to feel when I lived in their damp basement. Listening to my mother label me a jealous beggar while she was actively hiding a foreclosure notice and an eviction order in her illegally demolished living room was the most exquisitely ironic moment of my entire life. I stepped out from behind the stone pillar. My mother glanced over her shoulder one last time before exiting the church, clearly expecting to see me looking devastated or humiliated. Instead, I looked directly into her eyes. I did not frown. I did not scowl. I gave her a slow, cold, brilliantly sharp smile. It was the smile of a forensic accountant who had successfully audited a fraudulent ledger and found every single missing penny. My mother visibly shuddered. She turned her head away quickly and hurried out the door into the bright sunlight, desperate to escape the weight of my gaze. I did not follow them to the reception. I had absolutely no desire to watch them drink expensive champagne or listen to my father give a boasting, arrogant toast about family values. I had seen everything I needed to see. The illusion was complete. The trap was locked. They were completely and utterly blind to the reality speeding toward them. I turned around and walked quietly out the side entrance of the cathedral. I stepped out into the crisp, cool afternoon air. I pulled my car keys from my pocket and walked toward my vehicle. Tomorrow morning, my mother was going to host Bradley's elite, snobbish New York family for a lavish brunch inside a foreclosed home covered in cheap drywall and desperate fairy lights. She was going to serve them expensive food and brag about her beautiful estate. And tomorrow morning, I was going to show up at her front door with a county sheriff and an executed eviction order. I got into my car, started the engine, and drove away from the church. I had a very important meeting scheduled for the morning, and I needed to be perfectly prepared for the final reckoning. Sunday morning broke with a clear and brilliant blue sky over the affluent suburbs. It was the kind of pristine spring day that wealthy families pray for when hosting expensive outdoor events. The air was crisp, the neighborhood was completely silent, and the manicured lawns sparkled with morning dew. I sat in the plush leather back seat of a rented black town car parked just down the street from my childhood home. I was staring at the digital clock on the dashboard, watching the numbers slowly turn to 10:30 in the morning. My hands were resting peacefully in my lap. I was not nervous. I was not afraid. I felt an overwhelming sense of profound, absolute clarity. Sitting next to me in the back seat was my real estate attorney, Harrison. He wore an immaculate charcoal suit and held a thick leather portfolio on his lap. Inside that portfolio was the fully executed legally binding order of eviction signed by a county judge, granting Apex Horizon Holdings the immediate right to repossess the property. Parked directly behind our black town car was a marked county sheriff cruiser. Inside the cruiser sat Deputy Miller, a seasoned officer from the Civil Division, whose sole professional duty today was to ensure the peaceful mandatory removal of the occupants currently trespassing on my corporate property. At this exact moment, less than a block away, my parents were hosting the grand post-wedding brunch for my sister Chloe and her new husband Bradley. I rolled down my tinted window just an inch and listened. Even from down the street, I could hear the faint, sophisticated sounds of a classical string quartet playing in the background. My parents had hired a valet service for the morning. I could see the valets in their sharp white shirts jogging back and forth, parking a long line of luxury vehicles along the curb. Bradley's affluent, snobbish New York family had arrived. The Westons were a family that demanded absolute perfection, and my mother was currently bending over backward to provide them with the illusion of generational wealth. I closed my eyes and visualized the scene unfolding inside the house. My mother had undoubtedly hired a premium catering company to serve smoked salmon, imported caviar, and expensive vintage champagne. She had probably forced my father to wear his velvet smoking jacket to look like a distinguished patriarch. And right in the center of their home, separating the living room from the dining area, was the massive gaping hole where a load-bearing wall used to be. My father had desperately slapped up cheap, unpainted drywall panels over the exposed electrical wires just hours before the wedding. My mother had draped those raw panels with cheap fairy lights and plastic craft store vines. I knew she was currently standing in front of that disastrous construction zone, forcing a bright smile and desperately trying to convince Bradley's mother that the ruined wall was actually an intentional avant-garde architectural choice. Harrison checked his silver wristwatch and looked over at me. "The grace period has officially expired," he said quietly. The municipal stop work order was ignored. The rent is in severe default, and the 30-day notice to quit was completely disregarded by the tenants. We are fully cleared to execute the final order. The property belongs to you, and they are legally trespassing. Are you ready to proceed? I looked out the window at the long line of expensive cars parked along my street. I thought about the Thanksgiving dinner, where my mother had slammed her wine glass down and called me a parasite. I thought about my father throwing me out into the freezing November night, telling me I would never survive without their charity. I thought about the $40,000 they stole from me, the fraudulent credit cards they opened in my name, and the absolute lack of remorse they had shown every single step of the way. "I am completely ready," I replied. "Let us go." Our driver shifted the town car into gear and pulled slowly away from the curb. The marked sheriff cruiser followed closely behind us. We drove past the perfectly manicured lawns of my neighbors, past the towering oak trees I had grown up beneath, and pulled directly into the wide circular driveway of my property. The valet attendants froze. A young man in a white vest stepped forward to open my door, but he stopped dead in his tracks. When he saw the county sheriff cruiser pull up directly behind us, its light bar gleaming in the morning sun. Deputy Miller stepped out of his vehicle. He was a tall, imposing man, wearing a dark green uniform, a polished silver badge, and a heavy utility belt. The absolute, undeniable symbol of law enforcement had just arrived at the most exclusive social event of the season. I stepped out of the black town car. I wore a tailored navy blue suit and simple black heels. I did not look like a rejected daughter crawling back for a handout. I looked like a corporate executive arriving to audit a failing business. Harrison stepped out beside me, gripping his leather portfolio tightly. Together, the three of us began walking up the wide brick path toward the massive open French doors of the main entrance. Because the weather was so beautiful, my parents had left the front doors wide open to let the spring breeze into the foyer. A group of elegantly dressed guests was standing on the front porch, holding crystal mimosa glasses and laughing politely. Through the open doors, my mother's voice carried over the sound of the string quartet. She was speaking loudly and clearly, projecting her voice so that everyone in the immediate vicinity could hear her boasting. I paused on the brick walkway, holding up a hand to stop Harrison and Deputy Miller for just a moment. I wanted to hear exactly what lie my mother was currently spinning. "It has been in our family for decades," my mother was saying, her tone dripping with fake humility. "The acoustics in this house are just marvelous. Richard and I have poured so much love into this estate. Of course, the maintenance on a property of this magnitude is a full-time job, but it is entirely worth it. We own the property completely free and clear. No mortgages, no nasty banknotes to worry about. It is pure equity." I heard another woman speak. It was Mrs. Weston Bradley's mother. Her voice was sharp, aristocratic, and highly critical. "It is a lovely lot," Patricia Mrs. Weston said smoothly. "Though I must say, the open concept renovation you are attempting in the living room is quite bold." The exposed drywall look is certainly a unique choice for a traditional colonial build. My mother let out a high-pitched, nervous laugh. Oh, that is just a temporary phase of our grand redesign. Richard and I hired a very exclusive boutique architectural firm to modernize the space. We want the house to be absolutely perfect for the future. After all, Richard and I are not going to be around forever. We have already spoken to our estate attorneys. We plan to leave this entire estate to Chloe and Bradley as their inheritance. It will be the perfect place for them to raise our future grandchildren. The sheer magnitude of her delusion was breathtaking. She was standing inside a house that she had lost to foreclosure 6 months ago. She was actively renting the property on a month-to-month lease from an anonymous corporation. She had destroyed a load-bearing wall with a shady, unlicensed contractor. And yet, she was looking her wealthy future mother-in-law directly in the eye and promising to gift the multi-million-dollar estate to her golden child daughter as an inheritance. It was time to bring the performance to an end. I resumed walking up the brick path, my heels clicking sharply against the stone. Harrison walked on my right, and Deputy Miller walked on my left. As we approached the wide stone steps of the front porch, the guests standing outside finally noticed us. A woman holding a plate of smoked salmon gasped softly. A man in a pastel linen suit lowered his champagne glass, his eyes fixed entirely on the uniformed sheriff deputy. The polite, wealthy chatter on the porch instantly died, replaced by a tense, heavy silence. The sudden drop in noise outside caught the attention of the guests inside the foyer. Heads began to turn. The catering staff, carrying silver trays of expensive hors d'oeuvres, stopped moving. The ripple of uncomfortable silence spread rapidly from the front door into the main living room, completely drowning out the string quartet. My mother, realizing that her captive audience had suddenly stopped paying attention to her, boasting, turned around to see what was happening. She saw me first. Her eyes locked onto my face. For a split second, her expression twisted into a look of absolute furious disgust. She clearly thought I had defied her orders and shown up to the brunch uninvited just to spite her. She opened her mouth, undoubtedly preparing to demand that the valet forcefully remove me from the premises. Then her eyes shifted to the right. She saw Harrison in his sharp legal suit, holding a thick binder of documents. Then her eyes shifted to the left. She saw Deputy Miller. She saw the dark green uniform, the radio on his shoulder, and the shining silver badge pinned to his chest. The transformation of my mother's face was a masterclass in total psychological collapse. The arrogant, wealthy matriarch persona melted away in less than a second. Her jaw dropped open. Her eyes widened in pure, unadulterated terror. The color completely drained from her cheeks, leaving her looking sickly and pale beneath her expensive cosmetics. She realized instantly that the police were not here for a noise complaint. They were here for her. Panic seized her entire body. She dropped her crystal champagne flute. It shattered against the hardwood floor of the foyer, the sharp sound echoing through the dead silent house like a gunshot. "Excuse me," Mrs. Weston said, stepping back from the shattered glass in horror. "Patricia, what on earth is going on? Who are these people?" My mother did not answer her. She completely ignored her new elite family members. Driven by sheer, desperate survival instinct, Patricia lunged toward the open front doors. She practically shoved a catering waiter out of her way as she sprinted onto the front porch. She wanted to physically block the threshold. She wanted to stop the undeniable reality of her failure from crossing into the sanctuary of her fake wealth. I stopped at the top of the porch stairs, standing exactly 1 foot away from her. Deputy Miller stood tall beside me, his hands resting casually on his utility belt, exuding calm authority. Harrison unclasped his leather portfolio, ready to extract the legal documents. My mother stood in the doorway, breathing heavily. Her chest heaved up and down beneath her sequined gown. Her eyes were wild, darting frantically between my calm face and the sheriff deputy. The wealthy guests on the porch were staring at us with wide, shocked eyes. Dozens of people inside the foyer were craning their necks to watch the spectacle. My mother leaned forward. She brought her face inches from mine. Her hands were shaking violently as she gripped the wooden doorframe, trying to physically barricade the entrance with her own body. She lowered her voice to a harsh, venomous hiss, desperate to keep the surrounding guests from hearing the absolute panic in her tone. "How dare you show your face here today?" she hissed, her breath trembling with rage and fear. "How dare you bring the police to this house? You are ruining your sister's first day of marriage. Get off my property right now before I have you arrested for trespassing." I did not flinch. I did not step back. I looked at the woman who had stolen my identity, ruined my credit, and thrown me onto the street. I looked at the woman who had just spent the last 20 minutes bragging to a room full of strangers about owning a house she had lost to the bank 6 months ago. I kept my voice perfectly level. I spoke clearly, ensuring that every single wealthy guest standing on that porch could hear exactly what I was about to say. My mother stood blocking the grand entrance of the house she no longer owned. She had just rushed from her conversation with Bradley's mother, her face twisting from fake aristocratic joy into pure, unadulterated panic. She gripped the heavy wooden doorframe with both hands, her knuckles turning bone white. Her chest heaved up and down beneath her expensive sequined gown, her breath coming in ragged, desperate gasps. She looked at me, then at my real estate attorney, holding his thick leather portfolio, and finally at the uniformed county sheriff deputy, standing tall by my side. She hissed at me, her voice dropping into a harsh, venomous whisper, designed to keep the wealthy guests on the front porch from hearing the absolute terror in her tone. "How dare you show your face here today? You are ruining your sister's first day of marriage. Get off my property right now before I have you arrested for trespassing." I looked at the woman who had birthed me, the woman who had stolen my identity, ruined my credit, and thrown me out into the freezing November night. I felt absolutely no anger. I felt no sorrow. I felt only the cold, sharp precision of a forensic accountant preparing to close a fraudulent ledger for the very last time. "You do not own this property, Patricia," I said smoothly. "I do, and I am coming inside." I did not wait for her permission. I stepped forward, forcing her to either move out of my way or physically assault me in front of a county sheriff deputy. Her self-preservation instincts kicked in. She stumbled backward, her mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from the water, entirely incapable of forming a coherent sentence. I walked right past her and stepped into the grand foyer. Deputy Miller walked in right behind me, his heavy black boots sounding like a steady, undeniable drumbeat of justice against the imported tile. My attorney Harrison followed us inside, carrying the black leather portfolio that held the absolute destruction of my family's social empire. The interior of the house was a pathetic, chaotic collision of desperate luxury and undeniable disaster. Waiters in crisp white shirts carried silver trays of imported caviar and smoked salmon. A professional string quartet played classical music in the corner of the dining room, but separating the dining room from the main living area was the grotesque reality of my parents' financial collapse. The primary load-bearing wall had been ripped out by unlicensed, shady contractors. Raw, unpainted slabs of cheap drywall covered the gaping structural holes. My father had clearly slapped them up in a total panic the night before the wedding. My mother had desperately draped plastic craft store vines and twinkling fairy lights over the raw wood and exposed electrical wires, trying to disguise a hazardous construction zone as a bohemian aesthetic choice. It looked exactly like what it was, a cheap, desperate illusion. As we walked deeper into the living room, the atmosphere shifted violently. Dozens of guests in designer suits and expensive dresses stopped talking. The polite, sophisticated chatter died. The clinking of crystal champagne glasses ceased entirely. Every single face turned toward the grand foyer, completely captivated by the arrival of a uniformed law enforcement officer at a high society post-wedding brunch. My father, Richard, was standing near the large brick fireplace, holding a crystal tumbler of scotch. He was surrounded by a group of wealthy men, laughing loudly just moments before. When he saw me walking into the living room, flanked by the police and legal counsel, his laughter died instantly. He set his glass down on the mantel with a sharp, heavy clink. Across the room, Chloe and Bradley were standing near the temporary drywall, posing for professional photographs. Chloe wore a white silk dress that probably cost more than my entire college tuition. She saw me and her jaw dropped in pure, unadulterated shock. My father immediately went into full defensive mode. His fragile ego simply could not process reality. He puffed out his chest, completely determined to play the wealthy, indignant patriarch in front of Bradley's elite New York family. He marched across the Persian rug, his face flushing a deep, furious red. "Sarah, what is the meaning of this?" My father barked, using his loud, authoritative voice to ensure the entire room heard him. "You were explicitly told you were not welcome at this wedding weekend. Bringing a police officer to our home to throw a childish tantrum is completely unacceptable. Officer, please remove this woman from my property immediately. She is trespassing." Deputy Miller did not even blink. He looked at my father with the tired, unimpressed expression of a man who dealt with delusional debtors every single day of his career. "I am not here to remove her." "Sir Deputy Miller," said his deep voice, carrying easily across the dead, silent room. "I am here to execute a lawful order of eviction against the current occupants of this address. You have ignored a 30-day notice to quit. You have flagrantly violated a municipal stop work order regarding illegal demolition. You are legally required to vacate the premises." A collective theatrical gasp rippled through the crowd of wealthy guests. Bradley's mother pressed a hand to her expensive pearl necklace. Bradley's father, Mr. Weston, a man I knew to be a highly successful corporate attorney in Manhattan, narrowed his eyes and stepped forward from the crowd. His professional legal instincts were instantly engaged. "Eviction!" Chloe shrieked from across the room, nearly dropping her champagne glass onto her designer dress. "Dad, what is he talking about? What is happening?" My father waved his hands frantically in the air, desperate to keep his house of cards from collapsing. He turned to the crowd, forcing a loud, strained laugh that sounded more like a desperate choke. "It is just a clerical error," my father announced to the room, his voice shaking despite his efforts to sound confident. "It is a massive, ridiculous misunderstanding. We recently negotiated a highly lucrative deal with a corporate holding company regarding this estate. Some low-level desk worker must have filed the wrong paperwork in the county system. I will have my personal lawyers clear this up on Monday morning." He turned back to Deputy Miller, his tone dripping with arrogant condescension. "Officer, you are making a terrible mistake. I demand you leave our home right now before I file a formal complaint with your precinct captain." I stepped forward, placing myself directly between my father and the deputy. I looked my father dead in the eye. He was sweating profusely. The collar of his expensive tuxedo shirt was dark with moisture. His hands were trembling at his sides. He knew he was lying, and he knew that I knew he was lying. "There is no clerical error, Richard Pye," I said clearly, making sure my voice reached every corner of the vast room. "There is no massive, lucrative corporate deal. You are bankrupt. You have been bankrupt for months." "Shut your mouth!" my mother screamed, sprinting into the living room from the foyer. She grabbed my father's arm, her fingers digging into his tuxedo jacket like sharp claws. "Do not listen to her. She is a jealous, bitter liar. She is just trying to ruin her sister's perfect weekend because she has nothing of her own." I ignored her completely. I turned my attention away from my frantic, spiraling parents and looked directly at Mr. Weston. Bradley's father was a man who understood contracts, legal liabilities, and harsh financial reality. He was the absolute perfect audience for my next move. "Mr. Weston," I said, addressing the wealthy patriarch calmly. "I understand you are a senior partner in corporate law. I believe you possess the necessary expertise to verify the absolute truth of this situation for your family." Mr. Weston stepped away from the crowd and approached me. His expression was guarded, analytical, and completely stripped of the warm, familial joy he had been projecting all morning. He looked at my parents, then at the sheriff deputy, and finally at me. "I am a corporate attorney, yes," Mr. Weston said cautiously, smoothing the lapels of his suit. "What exactly are you claiming is happening here?" I turned to my real estate attorney. "Harrison, please provide the documentation." Harrison stepped forward and unclasped his black leather portfolio. He extracted a thick stack of official notarized documents printed on heavy legal paper. He did not hand them to my father. He did not hand them to my mother. Following my strict instructions, Harrison handed the entire stack of legal documents directly to Bradley's father. The room was so quiet, I could hear the heavy paper rustling in Mr. Weston's hands. Dozens of high society guests held their breath, completely paralyzed by the unfolding drama. Chloe was shaking uncontrollably, clinging to Bradley's arm. Bradley looked like he wanted the floor to open up and swallow him whole. "What you are holding are the certified recorded documents from the county clerk," I told Mr. Weston, my voice steady and commanding. "You will find the original notice of intent to foreclose dated 8 months ago. You will find the final deed of sale from the public courthouse auction dated 3 months ago." Mr. Weston flipped past the first few pages. His eyes scanned the dense legal text with rapid, practiced efficiency. I watched his face closely. I watched the exact moment his brilliant legal mind processed the catastrophic reality of the documents. The polite, wealthy sophistication drained entirely from his features. His skin turned a pale, sickly shade of gray. He looked absolutely nauseated. "This is a foreclosure deed," Mr. Weston murmured, his voice tight with profound shock. He looked up at my father with an expression of pure, unadulterated disgust. "Richard, the bank seized this property. You do not own this house." "It is a mistake," my father pleaded, his voice cracking violently. "Arthur, please, you have to believe me. It is a corporate mix-up." "It is not a mistake." Mr. Weston snapped, his voice suddenly sharp and furious. He flipped to the next section of the documents. "This is a recorded auction sale. The property was purchased by a Delaware corporation named Apex Horizon Holdings, and this is a month-to-month residential lease agreement signed by you, Richard, acknowledging that you are merely a tenant in this building." The absolute silence in the room shattered. A chorus of shocked gasps and frantic whispers erupted from the wedding guests. My mother buried her face in her hands and let out a loud, dramatic sob. Chloe collapsed into a nearby chair, crying hysterically about her ruined wedding brunch. Bradley backed away from my father, looking at him as if he were carrying a highly contagious disease. The wealthy, elite facade my parents had sacrificed everything to build was burning to the ground right in front of their eyes. "Keep reading, Mr. Weston," I instructed calmly, letting the chaos swirl around me without breaking my composure. "There is one final document you need to review. The incorporation papers for Apex Horizon Holdings." Mr. Weston turned to the very last page in the thick stack. It was the certified corporate registration from the state of Delaware. It listed the entity details, the operating agreement, and the sole managing member of the holding corporation. Mr. Weston read the name printed on the bottom line. His eyes widened significantly. He looked up slowly, his gaze shifting from the paper in his hands directly to my face. He finally understood the sheer magnitude of the trap my parents had walked blindly into. Apex Horizon Holdings. Mr. Weston said, his voice echoing clearly over the frantic sobbing of my mother and sister. "The sole owner and managing director of the holding company is Sarah." My father stopped breathing. He froze completely, looking back and forth between Mr. Weston and me, his brain violently rejecting the information. My mother dropped her hands from her face and stared at me in absolute paralyzing horror. I took one step forward, placing myself directly in the center of the destroyed, fake, luxury living room. I looked my father in the eyes. I wanted him to hear every single word clearly. I wanted him to remember this exact moment for the rest of his miserable life. "You do not own this house, Richard," I announced. My voice was a cold, perfectly controlled weapon, cutting through the room. "You lost it to foreclosure 6 months ago because you stole my identity. You committed felony wire fraud. You secretly opened a massive credit card in my name, and you maxed it out to pay for Chloe's engagement ring and Bradley's expensive watch." Bradley ripped his wrist away from his body, staring down at the silver Rolex ticking on his arm as if it were coated in poison. "When the bank demanded their mortgage payments, you had nothing left." I continued my gaze, never leaving my father's terrified face. "You let the house go to a public courthouse auction. You thought you could hide the truth from the world. You thought you could trick your new wealthy in-laws into believing you were an equal. But Apex Horizon Holdings bought the property for pennies on the dollar. I formed the holding company. I funded the cash purchase. I am the sole owner of Apex." I paused, letting the devastating reality crush the last remaining fragments of his arrogance. "I am your landlord," I said. The silence that followed my declaration did not last long. It shattered into a million jagged pieces of pure cinematic chaos. My father could not comprehend the reality of his total defeat. His brain simply short-circuited. He let out a raw, guttural sound that was half scream and half growl. He lunged forward across the Persian rug, reaching his hands out to physically snatch the stack of legal documents right out of Mr. Weston's grip. He wanted to tear the papers apart, as if destroying the physical paper would somehow magically erase the recorded county deed. Before my father could take a second step, Deputy Miller intervened. The seasoned law enforcement officer moved with astonishing speed and absolute authority. He stepped directly into my father's path, planting his heavy boots wide, and shoved a massive firm hand against my father's chest. "Step back right now, sir," Deputy Miller commanded. His voice was a booming baritone that rattled the crystal champagne glasses on the catering trays. "If you lay a single finger on anyone in this room, or if you attempt to destroy certified legal documents, I will put you in handcuffs and drag you out of here in the back of my cruiser. Do you understand me?" My father stumbled backward, his chest heaving, his face a horrifying mask of rage and absolute panic. He looked at the deputy, then at the wealthy wedding guests who were now actively backing away from him as if he were a violent criminal. The illusion of the sophisticated wealthy patriarch was completely gone. He was just a desperate broke man caught in a massive fraud. Across the room, Chloe was melting down. Her perfect, expensive wedding weekend had imploded in the most humiliating way possible. She grabbed Bradley's arm, her perfectly manicured fingernails digging into his expensive suit jacket. "Bradley, do something!" Chloe screamed, her voice shrill and hysterical. "Tell them to leave. Tell your father to fix this. My sister is crazy. She is lying. You have to defend our family." Bradley did not move to defend her. He did not step forward to comfort his new bride. Instead, he looked down at her hands gripping his jacket and slowly, deliberately pulled his arm away. The smug, arrogant smirk he always wore had been replaced by a look of sheer, unadulterated revulsion. He looked at the massive diamond ring on Chloe's finger, the ring my parents had bought using my stolen identity, and he took a large step backward. "Are you out of your mind?" Bradley hissed at her, his voice dripping with disgust. "Your parents stole your sister's identity to buy my watch. They bought your ring with stolen money. They are squatting in a foreclosed home. Do you honestly expect me to defend felony fraud? You lied to me. Your entire family lied to us." Mr. Weston handed the stack of documents back to Harrison. He turned to look at my father with the cold, calculating expression of a corporate attorney preparing to dismantle a hostile entity. "Richard," Mr. Weston said, his tone absolutely freezing, "you invited my family into a home you do not own. You hosted a wedding using funds obtained through identity theft. You dragged the Weston family name into a filthy criminal squatter situation. If you ever attempt to contact my family or my son again, I will personally ensure that the federal authorities prosecute you to the absolute fullest extent of the law for the wire fraud you committed to purchase those luxury goods. We are leaving." Mr. Weston turned to his wife, offered his arm, and began marching toward the front door. Bradley did not even look back at Chloe. He simply turned around and followed his parents out of the house, leaving his weeping bride standing alone in the middle of the illegally demolished living room. The rest of the high society guests immediately followed suit, scrambling toward the exit to escape the massive social disaster. The caterers abandoned their silver trays and quickly slipped out the back door. Within minutes, the house was completely empty of guests. The string quartet had packed up their instruments and fled. The only people left in the sprawling, fake luxury home were my parents, my weeping sister, my attorney, the sheriff deputy, and me. I stood perfectly still, watching the dust settle. I had not raised my voice. I had not thrown a tantrum. I had simply presented the absolute legal truth, and their entire world had burned to the ground. Harrison stepped forward, breaking the heavy silence. He opened his black leather portfolio and extracted one final, heavily stamped document. He walked deliberately across the room and held the document out toward my father. My father did not take it. He just stared at it with wide, hollow eyes. Harrison simply dropped the paper onto the coffee table right in front of him. "Richard and Patricia Harrison," began his voice purely professional and devoid of any sympathy. You are being served with the final execution of evictions signed and authorized by a judge in the county housing court." My father swallowed hard, his hands shaking violently at his sides. "You cannot do this. We have tenant rights. We require proper legal notice. You have to give us at least 30 days to vacate the premises. You cannot just throw us out on the street without a hearing." Harrison adjusted his suit jacket and looked at my father with a faint, chilling smile. "You were given a formal 30-day notice to quit. The process server delivered it directly to your hands 3 days ago. You chose to physically tear it up and ignore it. That was a clerical error." My mother cried out, her voice cracking as she clung to the edge of the sofa for physical support. "It was a mistake. We are good tenants." "You are not good tenants," Harrison corrected sharply. "You are highly destructive occupants." Apex Horizon Holdings did not pursue a standard eviction based solely on your failure to pay rent. We pursued an emergency expedited eviction based on gross malicious destruction of corporate property. Harrison pointed a finger directly at the gaping hole separating the living room from the dining area, where the cheap drywall panels barely concealed the massive structural damage. "You hired an unlicensed crew to demolish a primary load-bearing wall without a single municipal permit," Harrison continued. "You received a formal municipal stop work order, which you chose to ignore and conceal behind cheap craft store decorations. By compromising the structural integrity of the second floor, you posed an immediate danger to the property and to the surrounding neighborhood. A county judge reviewed the photographs of the illegal demolition and granted the emergency execution of eviction without the need for a protracted hearing. Your tenant rights were instantly forfeited the moment you swung a sledgehammer into a structural support beam." Deputy Miller stepped forward, placing his hand resting casually on his heavy utility belt. The legal explanations were over. It was time for the physical reality. "Listen to me very carefully, folks," Deputy Miller said, his booming voice echoing off the hardwood floors. "The judge has signed the order. You are legally required to vacate this property immediately. Because of the sheer amount of personal belongings inside the home, the court is granting you a strict, non-negotiable 48-hour window to remove your possessions." 48 hours! My mother gasped, her hands flying to her mouth in absolute horror. "That is impossible. We have an entire house full of furniture. We have nowhere to go. We have no money for a moving truck." "That is not the concern of the property owner or the county sheriff department," Deputy Miller replied firmly. "You have exactly 48 hours. I will be returning to this address on Tuesday morning at exactly 11 o'clock. If you are still inside this building at 11 o'clock on Tuesday morning, I will physically place you in handcuffs. I will arrest you for criminal trespassing, and I will haul you to the county jail. Any personal belongings left inside the house at that time will be considered legally abandoned and will become the immediate property of Apex Horizon Holdings to be disposed of as they see fit. Do you understand these terms?" My father slowly sank into a nearby armchair, his legs completely giving out beneath him. He buried his face in his hands. The arrogant, boasting patriarch was completely gone. He was just a broken, bankrupt man facing the absolute certainty of homelessness. Chloe fell to her knees on the Persian rug, ruining her expensive silk wedding dress. She was sobbing hysterically, burying her face in her hands. Her wealthy husband had abandoned her. Her elite future was gone. She was going to be evicted along with her parents, and the massive diamond ring on her finger was a piece of stolen, fraudulent evidence. But my mother refused to accept defeat. Patricia had spent her entire life manipulating her way out of consequences, and she was going to try one final desperate performance. She turned toward me. The fury, the arrogance, and the toxic pride completely vanished from her face. In an instant, she transformed herself into a weeping, broken, heartbroken victim. She stumbled across the room, her knees buckling as she threw herself onto the floor right at my feet. "Sarah?" My mother wailed, tears streaming down her face and ruining her expensive cosmetics. "Oh my God, Sarah, please. Please, you have to stop this. You cannot do this to us." I looked down at her. I did not step back. I just watched her perform. "I know we made mistakes," my mother sobbed, reaching out to grasp the hem of my tailored suit. "I know your father was harsh on Thanksgiving. We were just so stressed about the wedding. We were terrified of losing everything. We panicked, but we are still your parents. We gave you life. We raised you. You are my darling daughter. You cannot let them throw us out into the street like criminals." She looked up at me, her eyes wide and completely desperate. She clasped her hands together in a begging motion. "Please, Sarah," she pleaded, her voice breaking into a pathetic whine. "Family is everything. We can fix this. We can pay you back for the credit card. We can help you fix the wall. Just tell the attorney to cancel the eviction. Give us a chance to make things right. You have to help us. You have to remember family loyalty. We are blood. Please, my beautiful, darling girl. Please do not leave us homeless." I stared down at the woman weeping on the floor. I thought about the Thanksgiving dinner, where she had slammed her wine glass down and demanded I drain my savings account for her golden child. I thought about her calling me a jealous, bitter liar just 20 minutes ago in front of the entire church congregation. I thought about the thousands of dollars they stole from me and the absolute lack of hesitation they showed when they threw me out into the freezing November night. She wanted to invoke family loyalty now that she had absolutely nothing left. She wanted to play the loving mother now that I held the keys to her survival. I slowly reached down and gently pried her trembling fingers off the fabric of my suit. I stood up perfectly straight. I looked down into her terrified, weeping eyes. I did not raise my voice. I did not yell. I spoke with the quiet, absolute finality of a judge delivering a permanent sentence. "I am not your darling daughter, Patricia," I said smoothly, my words echoing in the dead silent room, "and I am definitely not your family." My mother froze her tears, stopping completely as the sheer coldness of my voice washed over her. "I am not family," I repeated, ensuring that my father and my sister heard every single syllable. "Remember, I am just a parasite." My mother let out a horrific, suffocated gasp. She collapsed forward onto the hardwood floor, burying her face in her arms, her body shaking with violent, uncontrollable sobs. She finally realized that her manipulation was completely useless. The bridge was burned, the house was gone. The family she had exploited and discarded had successfully returned to execute her total destruction. I did not feel a single ounce of pity. I turned my back on the woman crying on the floor. I looked at Harrison and Deputy Miller. "We are finished here," I said calmly. Tuesday morning arrived with the harsh, unforgiving clarity of absolute consequence. Exactly 48 hours had passed since I stood in that ruined living room and delivered the final eviction order. I did not go to the property myself to supervise their removal. I had absolutely no desire to watch my parents load their shattered lives into cardboard boxes. I monitored the entire situation from the quiet comfort of my office, receiving detailed, real-time updates provided by David and Deputy Miller. By 10 in the morning, the reality of their complete financial ruin was on full public display. 2 battered rented moving trucks were parked in the grand circular driveway of the estate. My parents could not afford professional movers. They had absolutely zero credit left to hire a luxury relocation service. They had to haul their heavy mahogany furniture, their expensive Persian rugs, and their boxes of designer clothes completely by themselves. My father, the man who had proudly puffed out his chest and boasted about his massive wealth just a few days prior, was now sweating profusely in the late spring heat, struggling to push a heavy mattress up the metal ramp of a cheap rental truck. My mother, stripped of her sequined gowns and her arrogant superiority, was frantically shoving her expensive porcelain dishes into recycled grocery store boxes. The social fallout was absolute and devastating. The affluent suburban neighborhood had definitely noticed the marked sheriff cruiser parked in the driveway on Sunday morning. The delicious, scandalous gossip had spread through their wealthy church congregation like a raging wildfire. By the time my parents began loading their rented trucks, a small crowd of spectators had gathered. Mrs. Gable and several other prominent church elders stood on the sidewalk across the street, watching the eviction unfold in stunned, judgmental silence. My mother tried to wave to them desperately, attempting to smile and project the illusion that this was all just a scheduled downsizing. Mrs. Gable did not wave back. She simply turned her head and walked away, completely severing my mother from the elite social circle she had sacrificed everything to infiltrate. Nobody offered to help my parents lift the heavy furniture. Nobody brought them casseroles or offered sympathetic prayers. The grand illusion of the wealthy, benevolent patriarch and the sophisticated, charitable matriarch was entirely dead. They were just two bankrupt, fraudulent squatters being forcefully removed by the county sheriff. When Deputy Miller arrived at exactly 11 o'clock, he did not offer any extensions. He marched up the front steps, ensured the house was completely vacated, and officially handed the keys over to my corporate holding company. My parents drove their rented trucks away from the elite suburbs, heading toward a cheap, cramped apartment they had barely managed to secure on a month-to-month lease with a predatory security deposit. They had absolutely nothing left but their massive, crushing debt and the undeniable knowledge that their discarded daughter had orchestrated their total downfall. The destruction of my sister's golden child fantasy was equally absolute and utterly brutal. Chloe had spent her entire life believing she was inherently superior, simply waiting for her wealthy prince to elevate her to the high society status she felt she deserved. She had stood by and watched my parents throw me into the freezing November night, entirely unbothered, as long as her luxury destination wedding was fully funded. But the powerful Weston family did not tolerate public humiliation, and they certainly did not tolerate associating with felony wire fraud. The moment Bradley and his parents left the ruined wedding brunch, they initiated a brutal, calculated financial severance. Bradley's father, acting with the ruthless efficiency of a seasoned Manhattan corporate attorney, immediately annulled all financial ties between his son and the toxic Myers family. The massive trust fund Bradley was supposed to access upon his marriage was strictly restructured by his furious parents. Chloe was completely cut off from the Weston family wealth before she even had the chance to unpack her custom wedding dress. She was legally bound to a man whose family viewed her with pure, unadulterated disgust. Bradley did not file for divorce immediately, likely to avoid a secondary, highly publicized social scandal in his elite circles, but their brand new marriage instantly transformed into a bitter, loveless prison. She was trapped in a cold, hostile relationship with a furious husband who constantly reminded her that her family was a pack of criminal frauds. The massive 3-carat diamond engagement ring she wore, the ring my parents had bought using my stolen identity, was legally seized by the credit card fraud department during their ongoing criminal investigation. The luxury destination wedding, she had demanded the $60,000 party that had ultimately triggered her family's total destruction, became the absolute worst mistake of her entire life. With the toxic occupants permanently removed and the locks changed, I officially took physical possession of the property. I walked through the empty, echoing halls of my childhood home alongside my real estate attorney and a team of highly vetted, fully licensed structural engineers. The house was a complete disaster zone. My mother had left cheap plastic fairy lights tangled in the expensive dining room chandelier, and my father's shoddy, unpainted drywall panels were actively crumbling around the exposed electrical wires. The air smelled of stale panic and cheap construction dust. But beneath the superficial damage and the terrible aesthetic choices, the bones of the house were incredibly solid. I deployed the extensive capital from Apex Horizon Holdings to hire the absolute best construction crews in the city. We tore down the dangerous illegal modifications my father had attempted. We brought in heavy steel structural support beams to properly and safely reinforce the second-floor master bedroom. We completely gutted the outdated kitchen, installing massive marble countertops and state-of-the-art appliances. We refinished the original hardwood floors until they gleamed, and we updated the bathrooms with high-end fixtures. I treated the entire renovation exactly like a forensic audit. I walked through the house identifying the structural weaknesses, removing the deep-seated rot, and rebuilding the foundation with meticulous, uncompromising precision. I took immense pleasure in stripping away every single trace of my mother's tacky, pretentious interior design. It took exactly 3 months to transform the property from a chaotic, foreclosed nightmare into a pristine, modern luxury estate. When the extensive renovations were finally complete, David listed the property on the open market. Because the affluent suburban neighborhood was highly desirable and the newly updated home was completely flawless, a massive bidding war erupted within 48 hours of the listing going live. We received multiple aggressive offers from wealthy buyers eager to secure the beautiful estate. We accepted an all-cash offer that was hundreds of thousands of dollars above our initial asking price. When the title officially transferred to the new owners, the massive staggering profit margin was deposited directly into the treasury account of Apex Horizon Holdings. I had successfully turned my parents' catastrophic arrogance and their illegal demolition into a remarkably lucrative corporate asset. The house that had been the site of my greatest humiliation was now the absolute source of my greatest financial victory. I did not stay in the city to gloat over my success. I did not care to monitor my parents' miserable new existence in their cramped apartment, nor did I care to watch my sister navigate the cold, hostile reality of her bitter marriage. I had successfully extracted my justice, balanced the ledger, and I was entirely finished with my past. I formally resigned from my position at the corporate accounting firm, packing my pristine apartment with a sense of overwhelming, profound peace. I moved completely across the country, seeking a fresh start in a place where the air felt completely clean and the sky stretched out endlessly. I used a substantial portion of the massive profits from the house flip to purchase a beautiful, sprawling penthouse apartment in a luxury high-rise building overlooking a vibrant, sunlit ocean. The building had round-the-clock, private security-restricted elevator access and thick, completely soundproof walls. It was a beautiful, elevated fortress of absolute peace. It was utterly untouchable. I decorated the massive penthouse with sleek, modern furniture, soft rugs, and filled the expansive living space with vibrant green plants. I did not hide in a damp, poorly ventilated basement anymore. I lived at the very top of the skyline, surrounded by brilliant, natural light and open, fresh air. I opened my own private forensic accounting consultancy, choosing my high-profile clients carefully and setting my own flexible hours. I built a life that was entirely mine, funded by my own intelligence, protected by my own resources, and secured by my own unbreakable boundaries. Every single morning, I wake up to the sound of the ocean waves crashing against the shoreline. I brew a fresh cup of coffee, walk out onto my expansive private balcony, and look out over the brilliant blue water stretching to the horizon. I feel absolutely no guilt for the choices I made. I feel no remorse for the people I left behind in the ruins of their own making. I breathe in the fresh sea air, completely free from the toxic weight of a family that only ever viewed me as an exploitable resource. Family isn't a free pass for financial abuse. Sometimes the only way to deal with a parasite is to cut off their host. If you've ever had to legally separate yourself from toxic relatives, tell me your story in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and remember your boundaries are your best investment.